梁歌制作，涅瓦大街，作者果戈里。最好的地方莫过于涅瓦大街了，至少在彼得堡是如此。对于彼得堡来说，涅瓦大街就代表了一切。这条街道流光溢彩，真是咱们的首都之花。
Production by Liang Gu, Nevsky Prospect, author, Gogol. There is no better place than Nevsky Prospect, at least in Petersburg. For Petersburg, Nevsky Prospect means everything. This street is full of brilliance. It is truly the flower of our capital.
我知道，住在彼得堡的平民百姓和达官贵人，无论是谁都是宁肯要涅瓦大街，而不稀罕人世上的金银财宝。不仅年方25岁。
I know that no matter who the common people or dignitaries living in Petersburg are, they would rather have Nevsky Prospect than the gold and silver treasures in the world. Not only is he 25 years old.
蓄有漂亮的唇姿和身着精心缝制的礼服的年轻人为他所倾倒，即便是满腮苍髯、脑袋光如银盘的老年人也对他情有独钟。而淑女们呢？淑女们对涅瓦大街就更是青睐有加了。
Young people with beautiful mustaches and well-made dresses are fascinated by it, and even old people with full beards and shiny heads are also fond of it. And what about the ladies? Ladies are even more fond of Nevsky Prospect.
又有谁不钟爱这条大街呢？只要一踏上涅瓦大街，一种游乐气氛便扑面而来。即便是你有要紧的事情要办，然而一踏上大街，准会把一切事情都忘得一干二净。这是唯一的清闲去处。
Who doesn't love this street? As soon as you step onto Nevsky Prospect, a fun atmosphere hits you. Even if you have important things to do, as soon as you step onto the street, you will forget everything. This is the only place to relax.
人们到这里来，并非为生活需求所迫，亦非为实惠和淹没彼得堡全城的买卖利欲所驱使。在涅瓦大街上遇到的人，似乎不像海洋街、豌豆街、铸铁街。
People come here not because of the needs of life, nor because of the benefits and the desire for business and profit that floods the whole city of Petersburg. The people you meet on Nevsky Prospect do not seem to be like those on Ocean Street, P Street, Cast Iron Street.
平民街和其他别的街上的人那么自私自利，在那些地方，贪欲、自私、势力分明摆在那些步行的和坐在各式马车里疾驰如飞的人们的脸上。涅瓦大街是彼得堡的交通要冲。
People in Mining Street and other streets are so selfish. In those places, greed, selfishness, and snobbery are clearly displayed on the faces of people walking and riding in various carriages at high speed. Nevsky Prospect is the traffic hub of Petersburg.
住在彼得堡区或者维堡区的人，如果好几年没有拜访过住在沙滩地或莫斯科关卡伊附近的朋友，那么他仅可以相信，一定会在涅瓦大街上彼此碰面的。无论是官员殖民路2。
If a person who lives in the Petersburg or Vyborg districts has not visited a friend who lives on the beach or near the Moscow checkpoint for several years, then he can be sure that he will meet each other on Nevsky Prospect. No matter it is the list of official positions.
还是问讯处提供的信息都不如涅瓦大街那样准确无误。涅瓦大街可真是无所不能，它是缺乏游乐的彼得堡的唯一消遣之地。人行道打扫得干干净净，天啊，那上面留下了多少脚迹啊！
Neither the information nor the information provided by the information desk is as accurate as Nevsky Prospect. Nevsky Prospect can do anything. It was the only pastime in Petersburg, which was starved of entertainment. The sidewalks were swept clean, and my God, what footprints were left on them.
一个退伍的老兵穿着又笨重又肮脏的皮靴，踩在花岗石的路面上，仿佛要咔嚓欲裂。一位少妇足蹬小巧玲珑、清洁如烟的女鞋，就像向日葵跟着太阳转似的。
A retired veteran wore heavy and dirty leather boots that seemed to crack when he stepped on the granite pavement. A young woman stepped on small and exquisite women's shoes that were as light as smoke, just like sunflowers following the sun. Of
不停地转动着小脑袋去看那五光十色的商店的橱窗，一个满怀升迁希望的准尉挎着铿锵作响的军刀，在地面上划出一道深深的痕迹。他们都迁怒于这条大街。
They kept turning their little heads to look at the colorful shop windows. A warrant officer, who was full of hopes of promotion, was holding a clanging saber and scratching a deep mark on the ground. They were all angry at this street. They kept turning their little heads to look at the colorful shop windows. A warrant officer, who was full of hopes of promotion, was holding a clanging saber and scratching a deep mark on the ground. They were all angry at this street.
蹬着或重或轻的腿劲儿，一天之内，在这条街上发生着多少神速的光怪陆离的变换？一昼夜之间，他又经历着多少世事的变迁？我们从一大清早说起吧。这是
Kick your legs with more or less force. How many rapid and bizarre changes take place in this street in one day? In one day and night, it has experienced so many changes in the world. Let's start early in the morning, at this time.
彼得堡全城飘溢着热烘烘的、刚烤好的面包的香味，衣衫褴褛的老太婆们蜂拥着奔向教堂和怀有恻隐之心的过往行人。这时的涅瓦大街还是空荡荡的。
The whole city of Petersburg is filled with the aroma of warm, freshly baked bread. Old women in ragged clothes swarm towards the church and sympathetic passers-by. Nevsky Prospect was still empty at this time.
身体壮实的店老板和伙计们穿着荷兰衬衫，还在梦乡里，要不正用肥皂擦洗自己高贵的脸颊和喝着咖啡。乞丐们聚集在糖果点心店门前，等候着那个酒童出来。
The stalwart shop owners and their clerks were still asleep in their Dutch shirts, or were scrubbing their noble cheeks with soap and drinking coffee. The beggars gathered in front of the confectionery shop, waiting for the wine boy to come out.
昨天他端着可可饮料，就像苍蝇一样满屋子来回乱跑。如今睡眼惺忪，手持扫帚，没系领带，把那些又干又硬的馅饼和残羹剩饭扔给他们。要办事的人们慢慢腾腾地满街走着，有时
Yesterday he was running around the house like a fly carrying cocoa drinks, and now he was bleary-eyed, holding a broom and without a tie, throwing dry and hard pies and leftovers to them. People who have to do things slowly walk around the streets, sometimes.
一些赶着去上工的俄罗斯庄稼人横过大街，他们足蹬着沾满石灰的长筒靴子，即便是走到以清澈闻名的叶卡捷琳娜水渠旁，也无法把它们擦洗干净。在这个时刻，
Some Russian farmers who were rushing to work crossed the street. Their long boots were stained with lime. Even if they walked to the Ekaterina Aqueduct, which is famous for its clarity, they could not clean them off. At this moment,
淑女们是不便于出门的，因为俄罗斯人喜欢骂骂咧咧，说些连戏园子里也听不到的粗野话。有时，一个睡意未消的官员夹着公文包赤处而行， 因为他到官厅去必须路过涅瓦大街。
It is not convenient for ladies to go out, because Russians like to curse and say rude words that cannot even be heard in the theater. Sometimes, a sleepy official walked with his briefcase under his arm, because he had to pass through Nevsky Prospect to go to the official office.
可以肯定地说，在这个时辰，也就是12点钟以前，任何人都不把涅瓦大街看作是目的，而仅仅当成是手段。它渐渐地变得熙熙攘攘，人们各有各的事情，各有各的操心事，各有各的烦恼。
It can be safely said that at this hour, that is, before 12 o'clock, no one regards Nevsky Prospect as an end, but only as a means. It gradually becomes bustling, people have their own things, and everyone has their own things to do. Everyone has their own worries and worries.
然而却无心去想到这条街道。俄罗斯庄稼人念叨的是10戈比银币或者7个半戈比铜币的事儿，老头子和老太婆挥动着2只胳膊，要不就在自言自语，有时还做出令人惊奇的手势。
However, I had no intention of thinking about this street. The Russian peasants were talking about 10 kopecks of silver or 7.5 kopecks of copper. The old man and the old woman were waving their arms, or talking to themselves, and sometimes making surprising gestures.
可是没有人听他们说些什么，也没有人嘲笑他们，除非遇上一群身着花粗布罩衫，手捧空酒瓶或者做好的鞋子，沿街一溜烟的飞跑的孩子们。在这个时刻，无论你穿着什么衣服，
But no one listened to what they said, and no one laughed at them, unless they met a group of children wearing floral blouses, holding empty wine bottles or ready-made shoes, running quickly along the street. At this moment, no matter what clothes you are wearing,
即便是不戴礼帽，而在头上扣着一顶便帽，或者是衣领高高的伸出领带外面，那么谁也不会留心在意的。以彼得堡区、维堡区、沙滩地。
even if you don't wear a top hat, but wear a beanie on your head, or if your collar sticks out of your tie, no one will pay attention. Petersburg District, Vybor District, Beach Area.
莫斯科关卡等均为彼得堡各处的地名。二舅俄每年编印一次的高级官员殖民地址。到了12点钟，来自不同国籍的家庭教师带领着身穿西亚麻布高领服装的孩子们。
Moscow Checkpoint, etc. are all place names of various places in Petersburg. The titles and addresses of senior officials compiled and printed annually in Old Russia. At 12 o'clock, tutors from different nationalities led the children in fine linen turtlenecks.
蜂拥着来到涅瓦大街，英国的琼斯们和法国的苛刻们依挽着自己必须像亲如父母一般照拂的孩子们的胳膊，缓步而行，十分庄重地向他们讲解。
People flocked to Nevsky Prospect. The English Joneses and the French Kirks held the arms of the children whom they had to take care of like parents, walked slowly, and explained to them in a very solemn manner.
商店门口挂的招牌是为了让人们知道店里出售什么货物用的。家庭女教师们、面容苍白的英国小姐和脸色红润的斯拉夫女郎，高傲地走在那些活泼顽皮的女孩子的身后。
The signboard hung at the entrance of a store is used to let people know what goods are sold in the store. Governesses, pale English girls and rosy Slavs, walked proudly behind the lively, naughty girls.
吩咐他们要挺胸抬肩，立正身子。总之一句话，在这个时刻，涅瓦大街上一片谆谆教诲之声。然而，接近午后2点钟时，家庭教师、 学校教员和孩子们便越来越少了。
They were told to straighten their chests, raise their shoulders, and stand at attention. In short, at this moment, there was a sound of instructing on Nevsky Prospect. However, towards 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there were fewer and fewer tutors, school teachers and children.
他们终于被温情脉脉的父亲们所取代，他们挽着花枝招展、珠光宝气、神经衰弱的女伴们的胳膊漫步街头。渐渐的，又有那些忙完了重要的家庭事务的人们加入到这个行列里，比如说
They were finally replaced by affectionate fathers who strolled the streets on the arms of their dazzling, bejeweled, neurasthenic female companions. Gradually, people who have finished their important family affairs joined the ranks, for example.
有的人跟家庭医生谈过了天气和鼻子上长出的一个小疖子，有的人询问过饲养的马匹和自己的天资过人的孩子的健康状况。
Some talked to their family doctor about the weather and a boil on their nose. Others inquired about the health of their horses and their gifted children.
有的人看了报上登载的广告和一篇有关迎来送往的要人的重要消息，还有的人则是已经喝过一杯咖啡和茶了。除此而外，又添了那些命运令人称羡。
Some people read the advertisements in the newspapers and an important piece of news about the arrival of dignitaries, while others have already had a cup of coffee and tea. In addition, these fates are added enviable.
捞到了办理特别事务的美差的人，伊琼斯和科克为英法人常见的姓氏，此处用来泛指英国和法国籍的家庭教师。
The person who got a good job to handle special affairs. Jones and Kirk are common surnames among British and French people, and are used here to generally refer to British and French tutors.
来到这条大街上的，还有在外交部门任职的，无论是职业还是习惯，都比人显得风雅的官员们。天啊，这里有多少令人艳羡的职位和官衔！他们令人感到多么的满足和快慰。哎。
Also coming to this street are officials who work in the diplomatic service. They are more elegant than others in both their profession and their habits. My God, how many enviable positions and titles there are here! How satisfying and comforting they are! Well.
可惜我不做官，也就无缘得到上司的眷顾。你在涅瓦大街上所看到的一切都合乎礼仪，男人们穿着长长的礼服，两手插在口袋里，女士们身穿粉红的。
It's a pity that if I don't become an official, I won't be favored by my boss. Everything you see on Nevsky Prospect is decorous. Men in long gowns with their hands in their pockets, ladies in pink.
洁白的和淡蓝色的缎子做的长居外衣，头戴呢帽。你在这里可以见到用十分精巧和令人惊叹的技巧从领带底下穿过来的精美绝伦的络腮胡子，有天鹅绒般的，有缎子般的。
A long train coat made of pure white and light blue satin, and a felt hat. Here you can see the exquisite beards, some velvet-like, some satin-like, that are passed under the tie with very delicate and amazing skills.
有黑如貂皮和煤炭似的，唉，可惜只有外交部门的官员才具有这样的美髯。上天不肯让别的部门的官员也享有黑色的络腮胡子，令他们大为恼火的是，他们不得不蓄着棕红色的胡子。
It is as black as mink and coal. Alas, only officials in the diplomatic service have such beautiful beards. God forbid that officials in other departments should also enjoy black beards, and to their great chagrin, they had to wear brown beards.
你在这里还可以见到笔墨难以形容的绝无仅有的纯姿，那是半生最美好的时光都倾注于其上的纯姿，长年累月、日日夜夜照拂的宠物，那是洒满沁人欲醉的香水和香精。
Here you can also see a unique mustache that is indescribable with words. It is a mustache that has been devoted to the best time of half a life, a pet that has been cared for day and night for many years. It is full of refreshing fragrance, intoxicating perfumes and essences.
涂满名贵而稀有的香膏的纯姿，那是夜里要用仿皮薄纸卷起来的纯姿，那是本人对其怀有动人的眷恋之情，而路人十分艳羡的纯姿。千百种呢帽、衣服、头巾，五光十色，轻薄如云。
The mustache that is coated with precious and rare perfume. That is the mustache that is rolled up with imitation leather tissue at night. That is the mustache that I have a touching attachment to and that passers-by are very envious of. Thousands of kinds of felt hats, clothes, and headscarves, all colorful and as light as clouds.
会使买到手的女主妇们整整2天里爱不释手，涅瓦大街上无论是谁见了都会眼花缭乱，犹如无数的彩蝶从草茎上蓦然飞起，散珠碎玉般的群集在雄性甲虫的上空盘旋飞舞。
The housewives who bought it will not be able to put it down for 2 days, and everyone on Nevsky Prospect will be dazzled when they see it. It's like countless colorful butterflies suddenly flying from the grass stems, clustering like scattered beads in jade, circling and flying in the sky above the male beetle.
你在这里可以见到连做出也不曾见过的腰肢，那样纤巧细长，比瓶颈大不了多少。你若迎面相遇，准会毕恭毕敬地退到一旁，唯恐一不小心让粗鲁的胳膊肘碰着了它。
Here you can see a waist that even Choo Choo has never seen before. It is so delicate and slender, not much bigger than the neck of a bottle. If you meet face to face, you will step aside respectfully, lest you accidentally let the rude person elbow touched it.
你在心里定然是又胆怯又担心，千万不可不在意地呼出一口气，吹折了那造化和艺术的绝妙的作品。你在涅瓦大街上还可以见到多么好看的妇人衣袖啊！哦，真是美艳极了。
You must be timid and worried in your heart. You must not exhale carelessly and destroy the wonderful work of nature and art. What beautiful women's sleeves you can see on Nevsky Prospect. Oh, so beautiful.
他们有点酷似2只气球，那淑女如果不是有一个男子唤着的话，准会忽然飘上天去，因为要把那位淑女举到空中，就像是把斟满香槟的酒杯送到嘴边那样轻便和随意。
They are a bit like 2 balloons. If the lady had not been replaced by a man, she would have suddenly floated into the sky, because lifting the lady into the air is like bringing a glass of champagne to her mouth. Light and casual.
你在这里可以遇到绝无仅有的微笑，那是一种技艺高超的微笑。有的微笑可以让你陶醉的浑身酥软，有的微笑会使你忽然觉得是草芥而低垂脑袋。
You can encounter unique smiles here, which are highly skilled smiles. Some smiles can make your whole body soft with intoxication, and some smiles can make you suddenly feel careless and lower your head.
有的微笑又会令你觉得高过海军部大厦衣的尖顶而昂首阔步。你在这里可以见到有的人在闲聊音乐会或者天气，却端着一副高雅的气派和凛然自尊的神气。
There are smiles that make you feel taller than the spire of the Admiralty building. Here you can see some people chatting about concerts or the weather, but with an elegant air and a dignified air of self-respect.
你在这里可以见到成百上千难以揣度的人和事。上帝啊，在涅瓦大街上可以遇到多么古怪的人啊！有许多的人朝你迎面走来，会要细看你的靴子，带你走过去之后。
You can see hundreds of incredible people and things here. God! What weird people you can meet on Nevsky Prospect. There are many people coming towards you, and they will look at your boots carefully after you walk past.
又会转过头来端详你的后襟。我至今还闹不明白干嘛要这么做。起初我以为他们是鞋匠，然而根本不是那么回事，他们大多是各个部处的办事人员。
He will turn his head and look at your back again. I still don't understand why I did this. At first I thought they were shoemakers, but that was not the case at all. They were mostly clerks from various ministries.
其中不少人以优雅的文笔拟写来往的公文，或者有的人无事闲逛，在糖果点心店里看看报纸。总之，大多是品行端正的人士。
Many of them wrote official documents in elegant writing, or some of them were just hanging out and reading newspapers in candy shops. In short, most of them were people of good moral character.
在午后2点到3点钟，可以称之为涅瓦大街活动高峰的大好时辰里，人间一切最优秀的作品都送到这里来大展出了。一个人展示的是一件上等海狸皮的时髦礼服。
During the great hour between 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which can be called the peak of activity on Nevsky Prospect, all the best works in the world are brought here for a grand display. One person displayed a fashionable gown of fine beaver fur.
另一个人显摆的是一只好看的又高又直的鼻子。第3个人蓄着十分漂亮的络腮胡子。第4个人长着一对顾盼有神的美目和戴着一顶令人叫绝的女呢帽。
Another person showed off a beautiful, tall, and straight nose. The third person had a very beautiful beard, and the fourth person had a pair of beautiful, thoughtful eyes and wore an amazing hat. Feather hat.
第5个人的优雅的小指头上戴着一颗嵌有辟邪物的宝石戒指。第6个人的先足蹬着一双玲珑剔透的女鞋。第7个人系着一条令人惊叹莫名的领带。
The fifth person's elegant little finger wears a gemstone ring embedded with evil spirits. The sixth person's slender feet wear a pair of exquisite and clear women's shoes, and the seventh person wears an amazing and inexplicable tie.
第8个人的唇姿简直令人叹为观止。然而，一过3点钟，大展出便告结束，人们渐渐散去。3点钟后，又是另一番景象。涅瓦大街转眼之间犹如春到人间。
The eighth man's mustache is simply breathtaking. However, as soon as 3 o'clock passed, the grand exhibition came to an end and people gradually dispersed. After 3 o'clock, it was another scene. Nevsky Prospect is like spring coming to the world in the blink of an eye.
满街尽是身着绿色文官制服的官员，饥肠辘辘的9等文官、7等文官和别的等级的文官们一个劲儿地加快脚步。年轻的14等文官、12等文官和10等文官们赶紧利用这个空。
The streets were filled with officials in green civilian uniforms. The hungry 9th-class civil servants, 7th-class civil servants and other ranks of civil servants kept speeding up. The young 14th, 12th, and 10th-class civil servants quickly took advantage of this opportunity.
在涅瓦大街上溜达一回，那神态就像是根本没有在办公地点枯坐6个钟头一样。不过， 上了年纪的10等文官、9等文官和7等文官则垂着脑袋快步走着。
Walking around the Nevsky Prospect, it's as if you haven't been sitting in the office for 6 hours. However, the elderly 10th-class civil servants, 9th-class civil servants and 7th-class civil servants lowered their heads and walked quickly.
他们可没有心思去端详过往的行人，他们还没有放下心事，脑子里乱糟糟的塞满了一大堆办而未了的案卷。好大一阵子，他们眼里看到的不是商店的招牌。
They had no intention of looking at the passers-by. They had not yet let go of their worries. Their minds were in a mess and filled with a lot of unfinished case files. For a long time, what they saw in their eyes was not the shop sign.
而是晃动着公文匣或者办公厅头的圆脸。一耸立在彼得堡的涅瓦河畔的一座建筑物。从4点钟起，涅瓦大街又是空荡荡的了。
Instead, he shook his briefcase or the round face of the head of the office. A building standing on the banks of the Neva River in Petersburg. From 4 o'clock onwards Nevsky Prospect was deserted again.
你未必能在这里碰上一个官员。偶尔有一个女裁缝打从店里出来，手捧一个盒子，穿过涅瓦大街。一位原是心怀仁爱的鼓掌的可怜的牺牲品，如今身穿面容粗毛呢的外套。
You may not meet an official here. Occasionally a seamstress came out of her shop and walked across the Nevsky Prospect with a box in her hand. The poor victim of the benevolent butcher was now wearing a tweed coat.
已沦为女乞儿，一个外地来的怪人，无论晨昏早晚都无所谓。一个身材修长的英国女人手里拿着手提包和一本书，一个俄罗斯搬运工穿着一件长不及腰的缎纹棉布长礼服。
Already reduced to a beggar, a weirdo from out of town who doesn't matter morning or evening, a slender Englishwoman with a handbag and a book in her hands, a Russian porter wearing a satin cotton frock coat that falls below his waist.
蓄着尖尖的胡须，一辈子过得窝窝囊囊。当他彬彬有礼地走过人行道时，他的背脊、胳膊、两腿和脑袋都在微微颤动。偶尔也走来一个身材矮小的手艺匠人。除此以外，
He had a pointy beard and had lived a useless life. When he walked politely across the sidewalk, his back, arms, legs and head were trembling slightly. Occasionally, a short craftsman walked by. In addition to this,
你在涅瓦大街上就再见不着别的人了。然而，一旦暮霭沉沉，笼罩在屋宇和街道的上空，港警披着挡风的粗席，爬上梯子去点街灯。
you will never see anyone else on Nevsky Prospect. However, once dusk fell over the houses and streets, the policemen, wearing rough mats to protect them from the wind, climbed up ladders to light the street lamps.
那些白天不敢摆出来的版画，又从商店的低矮窗口展示出来的时候，涅瓦大街重又活跃起来，开始热热闹闹了。这时，神秘的时刻降临了。
When those prints that were afraid to be displayed during the day were displayed from the low windows of the shops, Nevsky Prospect became active again and began to be bustling. At this time, the mysterious moment arrives.
灯光给万事万物都点染上一层奇妙而诱人的光彩。你可以遇见许多年轻人，他们大都是单身汉，身穿暖和的礼服和外套。这个时候，可以感触到一种目的的存在。
Light gives everything a magical and alluring glow. You can meet many young people, mostly bachelors, wearing warm dresses and coats. At this time, you can feel the existence of a purpose.
或者不如说是类似墓地的不可捉摸的东西的存在。大家的脚步都迈得很快，而且变得相当的凌乱。长长的身影在墙壁和马路上频频闪过，那投影几乎投照到警察桥头了。
Or rather, it is the existence of something elusive with a similar purpose. Everyone's footsteps are moving very fast, and they have become quite messy. The long figure flashed frequently on the wall and the road, and the shadow almost reached the police bridge.
年轻的14等文官、12等文官和10等文官四处转悠了很久，而上了年纪的14等文官、9等文官和7等文官多半待在家里，或者因为这都是一些有家室的人。
The young 14th, 12th, and 10th class civil servants have been traveling around for a long time, while the older 14th, 9th, and 7th class civil servants mostly stay at home, or because they are all wealthy people. Family man.
或者由于他们家里有德国女厨子会给他们烧一手好菜。你在这里又可以见到那些德高望重的老人，他们在午后2点钟时曾经道貌岸然和雍容华贵地漫步涅瓦大街。
Or because they have a German female cook at home who will cook them good dishes. Here you can again see those venerable old people who used to stroll the Nevsky Prospect with dignity and grace at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
你还可以看到他们像年轻的14等文官一样奔跑向前，为的是从泥帽下面窥视一眼老远就盯上的一位淑女的姿色。她那涂满胭脂的厚唇和双颊令许多散步的人都心荡神怡。
You can also see them running forward like young 14th class civil servants, in order to peek from under their felt hats at the beauty of a lady they have noticed from afar, her thick rouged lips and eyes. Cheeks make many people who take a walk feel moved.
尤其让那些店伙计、搬运工、身穿德国礼服而总是成群结队的挽着手闲逛的商人们心驰神往。别忙！这时，皮罗戈夫中尉拽住一个与之同行、身着燕尾服和披风的年轻人，高声喊道
It is especially fascinating for shop assistants, porters, and businessmen in German dress who always hang out in groups arm in arm. Don't be busy. At this time, Lieutenant Pyrogov grabbed a young man who was traveling with him and was wearing a tuxedo and cloak and shouted loudly.
看见了吗？看见了，一个佩罗奇诺伊笔下的绝色美人。伊佩罗奇诺生于1445至1452年之间，死于1523年，意大利著名画家。那你说的是谁呀？就是他。
Did you see it? I saw it, a stunning beauty described by Parasino. Parasino, born between 1445 and 1452, died in 1523, a famous Italian painter. Then who are you talking about? Ah, that's her.
那个黑发女子，多美的眼睛！天啊！多美啊！那整个的体态、身段、脸型，真是美极了。我跟你说的是那个金发女郎，就是跟在她后面走的那一位。你既然一眼看上了那个黑发女子
The dark-haired woman. What beautiful eyes. Oh my gosh, how beautiful. The whole figure, face shape, it's so beautiful. I'm telling you about the blonde, the one walking behind her. Now that you've caught your eye on the black-haired woman.
干嘛不跟着去呢？嗨，那怎么行？身穿燕尾服的年轻人一下子臊得满脸通红，大声嚷道：“你当她是晚上在涅瓦大街上卖笑的女人吧？她准是一位大家闺秀。 他叹了口气，继续说道
Why don't you go along? Hey, how can that be done? The young man in the tuxedo suddenly blushed with embarrassment and shouted loudly. Just think of her as a woman who makes jokes on Nevsky Prospect at night. She must be a lady, he sighed and said.
光是他身上穿的那件斗篷就值8-90卢布。笨蛋！皮罗戈夫嚷嚷说，使劲推了他一把，要他朝那色彩鲜艳的斗篷飘动的地方去。去吧，笨蛋，可别错过机会啊！我去追那个金发女郎。
The cloak she was wearing alone was worth 80 or 90 rubles. Fool! Cried Pyrogov, pushing him hard towards the place where the brightly colored cloak was fluttering. Go, fool, don't miss the opportunity. I went after the blonde.
两个朋友各自走开了。我可是知道你们的心思的。皮罗戈夫自以为是，洋洋得意地微笑着，暗忖道：他相信没有一个美人能抵得住他的魅力。且说那个身穿燕尾服和披风的年轻人。
The two friends walked away. I know your thoughts. Pyrogov thought to himself with a self-righteous and smug smile. He believed that no beauty could resist his charm. Let's talk about the young man wearing a tuxedo and cape.
胆怯而惶恐地迈开步子，朝远处艳丽的斗篷飘动的地方走去。那斗篷随着街灯的或近或远，时而闪着耀目的光彩，时而又忽然隐没在一片昏暗之中。他的心砰砰地跳个不停。
Stepping forward timidly and fearfully, he walked towards the place where the gorgeous cloak was fluttering in the distance. As the street lamp came closer or further away, the cloak sometimes shone with dazzling light, and sometimes suddenly disappeared into the darkness. His heart was pounding.
于是情不自禁地加快了脚步。他不敢指望得到那在远处飘然走着的美人的亲眼相看，尤其不敢怀有皮罗戈夫中尉所暗示的那种非分之想。可是
So he couldn't help but speed up his pace. He didn't dare to expect to be favored by the beauty walking in the distance, especially he didn't dare to entertain the kind of unfair thoughts hinted by Lieutenant Pyrogov, but
他却一心想要看看这个绝代佳人的住处，因为他说不定是从天上降落到涅瓦大街上来的，兴许又会要飞到别的什么地方去。他快步如飞，不停地把那些银然飘然。
But he wanted to see the residence of this extraordinary beauty, because she might have landed on the Nevsky Prospect from the sky, or she might fly to some other place. He walked as fast as flying, and kept moving those silver beards in the air.
派头十足的绅士从人行道上推开。这个年轻人属于我们这儿相当奇怪的一类人，他们既是彼得堡的公民，又是我们在梦中见到的，却又属于现实世界的人物。
The dashing gentleman pushed off from the sidewalk. This young man belonged to a rather strange group of people among us, who are at once citizens of St. Petersburg in characters we see in dreams, but who also belong to the real world.
这个独特的阶层，在这个充斥着官吏、商人和德国工匠的城市里是极不寻常的。他是一个画家，这不是一个奇怪的人物吗？一个彼得堡的画家，一个北国之地的画家。
This unique class was extremely unusual in a city filled with officials, merchants, and German craftsmen. He is a painter. Isn't this a strange character? A Petersburg painter. A painter from the Northland.
一个芬兰人聚居之地的画家， 这里的一切都潮湿、平坦、宁静、苍白、单调、暗淡。这些画家一点也不像意大利画家那样高傲，和如同意大利与他的天空那样热情。恰恰相反，他们大都是善良。
A painter of a place where Finns live, where everything is damp, flat, quiet, pale, monotonous, and dim. These painters are not at all as proud as the Italian painters and as passionate as Italy and its sky. On the contrary, most of them are kind.
和顺、腼腆、乐天的人们默默地酷爱自己的艺术，只在斗室中与两三有人静心品茶，谦逊地谈论着喜爱的话题，而毫不问及闲事。他常常把一个求乞的老太婆唤到家里来，让她坐上溜。
The docile, shy, and optimistic people love their art silently. They only sit in a small room with 2 or 3 friends quietly drinking tea, talking humbly about their favorite topics without asking about other things. He often called an old woman begging to his home and asked her to sit on the 6 or 6.
7个钟头，以便把他的可怜而麻木的脸相画到画布上。他也画自己房间的景物，那里摆满了各种小画具。由于年深日久和布满灰尘而变成咖啡色的石膏制成的手脚，折断了的绘画架。
7 hours to put her pitiful, numb face on canvas. He also painted scenes from his own room, which was filled with all kinds of small painting tools, hands and feet made of plaster that had turned brown with age and dust, a broken painting easel.
碟朝上的调色板，弹着吉他的友人，溅满颜料的墙壁以及洞开的窗户，从那儿隐约可见暗淡的涅瓦河和几个身穿红衬衫的穷苦的渔夫。
The bottom-up palette, the friend playing the guitar, the paint-spattered walls and the open windows, from which you can vaguely see the dim Neva River and a few poor fishermen wearing red shirts.
这些画家笔下所有的景物几乎总是透出一种灰暗的色调，那是北国之地擦不去的印记。尽管如此，他们总是满怀欣喜地潜心于自己的创作。他们通常都才华横溢。
Almost all the scenes painted by these painters always have a dark tone, that is the indelible mark of the northern land. Almost all the scenes painted by these painters always have a dark tone, that is the indelible mark of the northern land. Despite this, they always dive into their creations with great joy. They are usually very talented.
一旦接受意大利清新之风的熏陶，其才华就会像是从房间里移至于新鲜空气中的花木一样，伸枝展叶，开出绚丽的花朵来。他们总是十分胆怯，只要看见一枚徽章和厚厚的带穗肩章。
Once influenced by the fresh wind of Italy, his talents will spread out and bloom like flowers and trees that have been moved from the room into the fresh air. They are always very timid when they see a badge and thick tasseled epaulets.
就会局促不安，不由自主地把自己的作品剪下架来。他们有时也喜欢打扮一番，可是打扮起来总是令人觉得刺眼，倒像是衣服上打了个补丁似的。
They will feel uncomfortable and involuntarily reduce the price of their own works. They also like to dress up sometimes, but when they dress up, they always feel dazzling, as if they have a patch on their clothes.
你有时也可以看到他们同时穿着精致的燕尾服和污迹斑斑的披风，或者是值钱的天鹅绒背心和溅满颜料的长礼服。
You can sometimes see them wearing a sophisticated tuxedo and a stained cape, or a valuable velvet vest and a paint-splattered frock coat.
这就宛如你有时看到在一幅没有画完的风景画上 画着一个头朝下的自然女神，他因为找不到地方，便在从前专心致志地画过的一幅作品那涂抹的背景上勾勒了一个草图一样。
This is just like you sometimes see a nature goddess with her head facing down on an unfinished landscape painting. Because he couldn't find the place, he painted on the smeared background of a work he had been concentrating on before. It's like sketching out a sketch.
他从来也不正眼看你，即便是看你，那眼神也总是有点茫然不安，捉摸不定。他不会用监视人的凶鹰般的目光，或者骑兵军官的猛隼般的眼神盯视你。
He never looks at you. Even when he looks at you, his eyes are always a bit dazed and uncertain. He does not stare at you with the fierce eagle eyes of a supervisor or the falcon eyes of a cavalry officer.
这是因为他在同一时间里既要审视你的面容，又要比照立于房中的赫茨克勒斯伊的石膏像的神韵，或者在他的眼前浮现着正在酝酿的一幅图画。所以他常常前言不搭后语。
This is because at the same time he has to look at your face and the charm of the plaster statue of Heracles that stands in the room, or a picture that is brewing before his eyes. Therefore, his words often do not match his words.
有时答非所问，脑子里乱糟糟的，因而变得更加胆怯。我们描述的这个年轻人，画家皮斯卡略夫就属于这一类人，腼腆、胆怯，内心里却蕴蓄着感情的火花。
Sometimes the answers are wrong and my mind is in a mess, so I become more timid. The young man we are describing, the painter Piskarev, belongs to this category, shy. Sometimes the answers are wrong and my mind is in a mess, so I become more timid. The young man we are describing, the painter Piskarev, belongs to this category, shy and timid, but with a spark of emotion in his heart.
一旦有合适的时机，便会燃成熊熊的火焰。他暗怀着忐忑不安的心情，急忙跟在令人销魂的家人身后，似乎对自己如此冒昧也深以为意。他的眼神
Once the right time comes, it will ignite into a blazing flame. With secret uneasiness, he hurriedly followed the enchanting beauty, seeming to be deeply surprised by his own presumption. His eyes.
心思和感情都聚集在那个陌生的女郎身上，他忽然转过头来，望了她一眼。天啊，多么迷人的姿容！白皙耀眼，十分可爱的前额覆盖着玛瑙般的秀发，一头奇妙的卷发如波斯浪。
His thoughts and emotions were focused on the strange girl. She suddenly turned her head and glanced at him. Oh my God, what a charming look! Her dazzling white and very lovely forehead is covered with agate-like hair. A head of wonderfully curly hair.
几绺秀发从呢帽下面露了出来，轻拢着因傍晚的微寒而罩上了淡淡的红晕的双颊，樱唇紧闭，锁着一串最迷人的梦幻。童年旧事的余韵，明亮的圣灯前的浮想联翩和漠然的感愤。
A few strands of hair peeked out from under the felt hat, lightly covering her cheeks that were lightly flushed due to the slight chill in the evening. Her cherry lips were tightly closed, locking a string of the most charming dreams. The aftertaste of childhood memories, the thoughts and silent excitement in front of the bright holy lamp.
这一切似乎都凝聚、融合和映照在他的两片匀称的樱唇上。他望了皮斯卡略夫一眼，他的心不由得悸动起来。他的目光是严厉的，有人公然无耻地尾随而来。
All of this seemed to be condensed, integrated, and reflected on her two well-proportioned lips. She glanced at Piskarev, and his heart throbbed involuntarily. Her eyes were stern, and someone was following her openly and shamelessly.
他的脸上猝然表露出恼怒之情，然而在这张妩媚动人的娇脸上，纵然是怒气冲冲，也是令人心醉的。一缕羞愧和胆怯之情袭上心头，他立时停住了脚步，两眼低垂。可是
Her face suddenly showed an expression of irritation. However, even the anger in this charming face was fascinating. A feeling of shame and timidity hit his heart, and he immediately stopped and lowered his eyes. But
怎么能跟这位女神失之交臂，甚至全然不知她在何处圣庙寄予今生呢？年轻的幻想家想到这里，于是下决心继续紧跟在后。为了不让人发现，他离得远远的，无所事事的东张西望。
how could we miss this goddess and not even know where she lives in the temple? The young dreamer thought of this and determined to follow closely. In order not to be discovered, he stayed far away and looked around idly.
仔细查看着各处的招牌，同时又一步不离地紧紧盯着陌生女郎的去向。来往的行人渐渐稀少了，街道也变得寂静多了。那个绝色佳人回首望了望，他似乎觉得
He carefully looked at the signs everywhere, and at the same time, he kept an eye on the strange girl's whereabouts. The number of pedestrians gradually became less and less, and the street became much quieter. The beautiful woman looked back, and he seemed to feel
一丝浅浅的笑意掠过他的嘴角，他全身微微颤抖起来，不敢相信自己的眼睛。不，那是街灯的骗人的光影在他的脸上制造出来的微笑的幻影。不，那是自身的幻想对他的嘲弄。可是
A faint smile crossed the corner of her mouth. His whole body trembled slightly, and he couldn't believe his eyes. No, it was the illusion of a smile created on her face by the deceptive light and shadow of the street lamp. No, it was his own fantasy mocking him. But
他胸前的呼吸急促起来了，处在一种莫名的战栗之中，全身的感情在沸腾，眼前的一切都蒙上了一层迷离之色。人行道在他的脚下急速地奔来。
his breathing quickened on his chest. He was in an inexplicable trembling. The emotions all over his body were boiling, and everything in front of him was cast in a blur. The sidewalk rushed quickly beneath his feet.
奔驰的骏马拉着的教士马车似乎凝立不动，大桥渐渐拉长了，在拱形处忽然折断，楼房倒立着，岗亭朝他迎面倒塌下来。
The carriage drawn by the galloping horses seemed to be standing still. The bridge gradually lengthened and suddenly broke at the arch. The building stood upside down, and the sentry box collapsed towards him.
而哨兵的抚恤连同招牌上的金字和剪刀图案仿佛在他的睫毛上闪闪发亮，这一切都照因于那娇媚女子的一次顾盼，一次回眸。他视而不见，听而不闻。
The sentinel's axe and the gold characters and scissors pattern on the sign seemed to shine on his eyelashes. All this was caused by the charming woman's glance and look back. He turns a blind eye and hears nothing.
无知无觉地跟着那双先祖留下的清洁的脚迹一路飞跑着，极力想要放慢那随着心脏的砰砰跳动而飞快迈动的脚步。有时他也心存疑虑，他那脸上的表情是否真的对他有意垂青。
He unconsciously ran along the light footsteps left by those slender feet, trying his best to slow down the pace that was moving so fast with the pounding of his heart. Sometimes he wondered whether the expression on her face was really favorable to him.
这时他便驻足而立，犹豫片刻，然而心灵的搏动、难以抗拒的力量和感情的激荡又驱使他直往前奔。他甚至没有注意到，有一幢4层楼的房子忽然耸立在他的眼前，4排窗户灯火通明。
At this time, he stopped and hesitated for a moment, but the beating of his heart, the irresistible power and the excitement of emotion drove him forward again. He didn't even notice that a 4-story house suddenly stood in front of him, with 4 rows of windows brightly lit.
全都瞪眼望着他，门口的铁栏杆结实地撞了他一下。他看见那陌生的女郎飞也似的跑上楼梯，回过头来，把手指搁在唇边，示意他可以跟着上楼。他的2腿哆嗦着，思绪沸腾。
Everyone stared at him, and the iron railings of the door bumped hard against him. He saw the strange girl running up the stairs as fast as she could. She turned around and put her finger to her lips, indicating that he could follow her upstairs. His legs were trembling, his thoughts were boiling.
一缕强烈的欣喜之情如闪电一般直透他的心窝。不，这不是幻梦。天哪！这一瞬间多么幸福！这顷刻之间，生活多么奇妙！伊赫茨克勒斯系希腊神话中的大力士。
A strong feeling of joy shot through his heart like lightning. No, this is not a dream. Oh my gosh! How happy this moment is! How wonderful life is in this moment! Heracles is the strong man in Greek mythology.
是宙斯与人间女子所生的儿子，在罗马神话中称为赫尔库勒斯。可是，这一切不是做梦吧？陌生的女郎为了得到他天仙似的回眸一瞥，他心甘情愿地奉献自己的生命。
He is the son of Zeus and a human woman, known as Hercules in Roman mythology. But isn't this all a dream? Strange girl, in order to get her angelic glance back, he is willing to sacrifice his life.
他把前来他的住所看上一眼视为难以言喻的幸福，难道真的对他有情有义，亲眼相看吗？他飞快地跑上楼去，他心里没有任何世俗的邪念，也不曾燃起尘世的欲火。是的。
He regarded coming to her residence to take a look at her as an indescribable happiness. Could it be that she really had feelings for him and favored him? He ran upstairs quickly. He didn't have any worldly evil thoughts in his heart, nor was he ignited by worldly desires, yes.
他此时此刻是纯真无邪的，犹如一个童真少年对于情爱还只有一种朦胧的精神上的渴求。本来会在一个淫荡的人的内心里激起非礼的欲念的东西，恰恰相反。
He is innocent at this moment, like a virgin boy who only has a vague spiritual desire for love. The very things that would arouse indecent desires in a lustful person do just the opposite.
却只是使他内心的思绪变得更加圣洁。这是那位绝色美人给予他的一种信赖，这种信赖促使他立下誓愿，要像骑士一样端庄方正，忠实地听从他的所有吩咐。他只是期盼着。
But it only made his inner thoughts become more holy. This was a kind of trust given to him by that stunning beauty, which made him vow to be dignified and upright like a knight and faithfully obey all her commands. He was just looking forward to it.
吩咐他做的事尽可能艰难些、费力些，他就可以竭尽全力去克服千难万险。他相信一定是有什么秘密而又重要的事情逼得他非信赖他不可， 一定是要他大力帮忙。
Ask him to do something as difficult and laborious as possible, and he can do his best to overcome all difficulties and dangers. He believed that there must be some secret and important matter that forced her to trust him and require his vigorous help.
而他觉得自己是有力量和决心去做任何事情的。楼梯盘旋而上，他那急速涌来的幻想也同他一道回旋飞舞。上楼小心点，他说话的声音如竖琴一般冥想。
And he felt that he had the strength and determination to do anything. The stairs spiraled up, and his racing fantasies whirled with them. Be careful going upstairs. Her speaking voice sounded like a harp.
他浑身的血管不由得微微震颤。在4层楼昏暗的高处，陌生女郎敲了敲门，门豁地开了，他们一起走了进去。一个容貌可人的妇人手擎着蜡烛迎上前来。
The blood vessels all over his body couldn't help but tremble slightly. In the dark high place on the 4th floor, the strange girl knocked on the door. The door opened suddenly, and they walked in together. A lovely-looking woman came forward with a candle in her hand.
可是却那么奇怪而放肆地望了一眼皮斯卡略夫，他不由得垂下了眼睛。他们进了房间，但见3个妇人的身影分散在各处角落里，一个摆弄着纸牌，另一个坐在钢琴旁边。
But he looked at Piskarev so strangely and wildly that he couldn't help but lower his eyes. They entered the room. But I saw the figures of 3 women scattered in various corners. One was playing with cards, the other was sitting at the piano.
用2个指头弹着好似悲凉的波洛涅兹舞曲，还有一个妇人正在对镜梳妆，梳着她那长长的秀发。虽然有陌生人进来，她压根儿没有想停下她的装扮。
Playing something like a sad polonaise with 2 fingers, there is also a woman who is dressing up in the mirror and combing her long hair. Although a stranger came in, she did not want to stop her work at all. Dress up.
房间里处处呈现出令人扫兴的杂乱景象，只有在单身汉的自在惯了的房间里才会见到这种情形。家具倒是挺不错的，却布满了灰尘，一只蜘蛛就在雕花的飞檐上结网。
The room was filled with that unpleasant clutter which can only be seen in a room accustomed to the ease of a bachelor. The furniture was fine, but covered with dust. A spider was spinning its web on the carved cornice.
从没有关严的另一间房的门缝里，隐约看见一只闪光的带马刺的皮靴和制服的红边士，到处传来男女放荡不羁的欢声笑语。天啊，他到什么地方来了？起初他不愿相信。
From the crack in the door of another room, which was not closed, I could vaguely see a shining leather boot with spurs and the red trim of a uniform. The bohemian laughter of men and women could be heard everywhere. From the crack in the door of another room, which was not closed, I could vaguely see a shining leather boot with spurs and the red trim of a uniform. The bohemian laughter of men and women could be heard everywhere. God, where has he come? At first he didn't want to believe it.
开始仔细打量房里的各种物品，可是四壁空空，窗户没有挂窗帘，没有一点主妇细心操持的迹象。这些可怜的妇人一个个面容憔悴，其中一个几乎就在他的面前坐了下来。
He began to look carefully at the various items in the room. However, the walls were empty, the windows had no curtains, and there was no sign of the housewife's careful care. Each of these poor women looked haggard, and one of them was almost sitting in front of him. Come down.
若无其事地端详着他，就像是查看别人衣服上的一点污迹似的。这一切都使他确信，他走进了一个可悲的淫魔、浮华的文明和首都可怕的人满为患的产物所盘踞的藏垢纳无之所。
Looking at him as casually as one would look at a stain on someone else's clothes, all this convinced him that he had entered into a miserable nymphomaniac, the product of ostentatious civilization and the terrible overcrowding of the capital, a place of filth and evil that it occupies.
在这个淫窟里，人亵渎的摧残和嘲笑一切使生活得以美化的纯洁和神圣的东西。妇女，这个世界之花，创造物之冠，竟然变成一种奇怪而轻薄的生灵。
In this den of whoredom, people blasphemously destroy and ridicule all the pure and sacred things that beautify life, and women, the flower of the world and the crown of creation, turn into a strange and frivolous creature.
他连同其心灵的纯真一起丧失了一切女性的品格，而令人厌恶地学来了男人的乖巧和无耻，因而不再是柔弱、妩媚的和有别于我们男子的女人。
She lost all her feminine qualities along with the innocence of her soul, and disgustingly acquired the obedience and shamelessness of men, so she was no longer weak, charming, and different from us men.
皮斯卡略夫瞪着惊异的眼睛，从头到脚地打量着他，仿佛想要弄清楚，到底是不是那个在涅瓦大街上令他销魂和把他带到这里来的美人。然而，他面对着他站着，依然是那样楚楚动人。
Piskarev looked at her from head to foot with astonished eyes, as if he wanted to know whether it was the beauty who had enchanted him on the Nevsky Prospect and brought him here. However, she stood facing him, still looking so charming.
她的头发依然是那样秀丽，一双眼睛看上去仍然像天仙一般美丽。她神采奕奕，芳龄只有17岁，看得出来，她刚刚落入这可怕的淫窟里，他还是不敢去抚摸她的脸颊。
Her hair is still so beautiful. Her eyes still look as beautiful as a fairy. She was full of energy. She was only 17 years old. It was obvious that she had just fallen into this terrible slut. He still did not dare to touch her cheek.
那脸颊是那样鲜嫩可爱，轻照着一抹淡淡的红晕，她实在是妩媚动人。他一动不动地站在她的面前，打算就这么傻乎乎地出神望着，就像先前那样忘乎所以。可是
Her cheeks were so fresh and cute, lightly covered with a faint blush. She was really charming. He stood motionless in front of her, intending to just stare blankly, as forgetfully as before. But
那美人却讨厌这样长时间的无言相对，直视着他的眼睛，意味深长的嫣然一笑。然而这微笑里却透出可怜的厚颜无耻的意味，那微笑在他的脸上显得十分怪诞。
But the beauty hated such a long silent conversation, so she looked directly into his eyes and smiled meaningfully. Yet there was something pitiful and impudent about it. It looked grotesque on her face.
犹如贪装枉法之徒硬要装出笃信上帝的脸相，明明是诗人，却去捧读账本那样格格不入。他猝然一震，他张开樱唇小嘴，说了些话，全都无聊之极，庸俗不堪，仿佛一个人沦落了。
It's like a greedy person trying to pretend to believe in God, and it's as out of place as a poet reading an account book. He was suddenly startled. She opened her small lips and said some words, all of which were extremely boring and vulgar, as if she had fallen into despair.
连理智也丧失殆尽，他已经什么也不想听了。他像一个孩子似的，显得十分可笑而憨厚， 既没有利用这一艳遇的良机，也没有感到十分高兴，换了别人早就欣喜若狂了。
Even his sanity has been lost. He didn't want to hear anything anymore. He was like a child, looking very ridiculous and naive. He neither took advantage of this opportunity nor felt very happy. Someone else would have been ecstatic.
而是像野山羊一样撒腿跑到了街上。他耷拉着脑袋，垂着两手，坐在自己的房里，就像一个穷光蛋找到了一颗价值连城的珍珠，又不慎跌落在茫茫大海里一样。这样的绝色美人。
Instead, he ran out into the street like a wild goat. He sat in his room with his head drooped and his hands hanging down, like a pauper who had found a priceless pearl and accidentally dropped it into the vast ocean. Such a stunning beauty.
这样的天姿国色在哪里呢？在什么地方？他再也说不下去了。的确，再没有比看到天生丽质沉沦于淫荡的腐臭气息之中更令我们悲痛欲绝的了。让丑陋去跟淫荡苟合吧，可是丽质。
Where is this beauty of the sky and country? Where? He could say no more. Indeed, there is nothing that makes us more devastated than to see natural beauty sinking into the rancid breath of lasciviousness. Let ugliness cooperate with lasciviousness, but beauty.
温柔的丽质，它在我们的心目中只能与纯洁无瑕结合在一起。可怜的皮斯卡略夫为之着迷的美人，的确是一个绝妙而非凡的女性。
Gentle beauty, it can only be combined with purity and flawlessness in our minds. The beauty over whom poor Piskarev was fascinated was indeed a wonderful and extraordinary woman.
她竟处身在这样一个卑污的魔窟里，则尤其显得怪异。她娇媚动人，姿容秀丽，透出一种优雅的气度。怎么也不会想到，淫魔竟然向她伸出了可怕的利爪。
It was especially strange that she should be in such a despicable devil's cave. She was charming, beautiful in appearance, and exuded an elegant demeanor. She would never have thought that the evil demon would stretch out its terrifying claws towards her.
她本该是钟情的丈夫的无价之宝，幸福的世界，极乐的天堂，全部的财富。她本该是寻常人家中一颗迷人而寂静的星辰，只要樱唇微起，便会说出悦耳动听的吩咐来。她本该是一尊女神。
She should have been the priceless treasure of her beloved husband, the world of happiness, the paradise of bliss, and all the wealth. She should have been a charming and silent star in an ordinary person's home, and she would speak sweet words as long as her lips were slightly opened. Order to come. She was supposed to be a goddess.
处身于人头攒动的大厅之中，闪亮的香木地板之上，辉耀的烛光之旁，消受着一大群拜倒在他的脚下的爱慕者的无言的崇敬。可惜他却屈从于阴险的恶魔的意志。
In the crowded hall, on the shiny parquet floor, next to the bright candlelight, enjoying the silent admiration of a large group of admirers who fell at her feet, alas, it was a pity that she succumbed to the insidious devil's will.
跟着去毁掉生活的和谐，终于被恶魔狞笑着扔进了万丈深渊。他沉浸在揪心的哀怜之中，孤坐在结了灯花的烛火之前。午夜已过，塔楼上的钟已敲过12点半了，而他仍旧坐着。
He went on to destroy the harmony of life, and was finally thrown into the abyss by the devil with a grin. He was immersed in heart-wrenching pity and sat alone in front of the candlelight. It was past midnight, and the clock on the tower had struck 12:30, but he was still sitting.
呆然不动，没有睡意，也不想干什么事情。瞌睡趁他一动不动的时候，悄悄地袭来，房间渐渐远去，只有烛火透过他已沉入的梦境闪着亮光。陡然间响起了一阵敲门声，他倏然一惊。
He was motionless, not sleepy, and didn't want to do anything. Drowsiness crept over him quietly while he was motionless. The room gradually faded away, with only the candlelight shining brightly through the dream he had sunk into. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and he was suddenly startled.
接着便醒了，门豁然开启，进来一个穿着华丽制服的仆人。他的这间孤身独处的屋子，从来不曾有身着镶有金银边饰的华丽制服的人前来光顾过，更何况在这种不寻常的时刻。
Then he woke up. The door suddenly opened, and a servant in gorgeous uniform came in. His solitary room had never been visited by anyone wearing gorgeous uniforms trimmed with gold and silver, let alone at such an unusual moment.
他觉得困惑不解，用一种急切探寻的目光望着进来的仆人。有一位太太，仆人深鞠一躬说：“就是您几个小时前到他的住所去过的那位太太，吩咐我来请您，还打发了马车来接您去。”
He felt puzzled and looked at the servant who came in with an eager and inquiring look. "There is a lady," said the servant, bowing deeply, "whose house you visited a few hours ago. She has asked me to come to see you, and has sent a carriage to fetch you."
皮斯卡略夫站在那儿，默然无语，深感惊讶。打发马车、穿制服的仆人，不，大概是弄错了。喂，伙计，他怯怯地说：“您大概是弄错了地方。您家的太太肯定是要您去接别人，而不是我。”不，先生。
Piskarev stood there, speechless, deeply surprised. "Send the carriage, uniformed servant." "No, it's probably a mistake." "Hey, man," he said timidly, "you probably got the wrong place. Your wife must have asked you to pick up someone else, not me." "No, sir."
我没有弄错，不是您把我们家太太一直送回到铸铁街那幢房子的4层楼上的吗？是啊。那就请快去吧，太太一定要见您，务必请您马上就去。皮斯卡略夫飞跑下楼。
"I wasn't mistaken. Didn't you send our wife all the way back to the 4th floor of the house on Cast Iron Street?" Yes." "Well, please go quickly. My wife must see you, and I must ask you to go right away." Piskarev ran downstairs.
院子里果然停着一辆轿式马车，他坐上马车，车门砰的一声关上了，马路上的石子儿在车轮和马蹄下呀呀的响个不停，一幢幢灯火通明的房子和明晃晃的招牌在车窗旁边一一闪过。
Sure enough, there was a carriage parked in the yard. He got into the carriage, and the door slammed shut. The stones on the road rattled under the wheels and horses' hooves. Brightly lit houses and bright signs flashed past the windows one by one.
皮斯卡略夫一路上思前想后，不知道该怎么来解释这件离奇的事儿。私宅、马车、衣着华丽的仆人，他无论如何无法把这一切跟4楼上的那间房。
Piskarev thought about it all the way and didn't know how to explain this bizarre thing. The private house, the carriage, the gorgeously dressed servants. He could not compare all these to the room on the 4th floor.
满是灰尘的窗户和音调失准的钢琴协调起来。马车在灯火辉煌的大门前停了下来，他不禁惊呆了。马车一字排开， 车夫们互相说着话，一个个窗户灯火通明，乐曲声此起彼伏。
The dusty windows harmonize with the out-of-tune piano. The dusty windows harmonize with the out-of-tune piano. The carriage stopped in front of the brightly lit gate, and he couldn't help being stunned. The carriages were lined up, the drivers were talking to each other, the windows were brightly lit, and music was playing one after another.
身着华丽制服的仆人搀扶他下了车，恭恭敬敬地把他送到前厅里。只见大理石圆柱悚然而立，看门人身穿绣金制服，披风和皮衣到处堆放着，一片耀眼的灯火。
Servants in gorgeous uniforms helped him out of the car and took him respectfully to the front hall, where marble columns stood towering. The doorman wore a gold-embroidered uniform, and cloaks and leather coats were piled everywhere, creating a dazzling scene. Lights.
悬空的楼梯围着闪光的栏杆，洒满了香水，一直通到楼上。他上了楼，跨进了头一间大厅，一见熙熙攘攘的场面，吓得连连倒退出来。人们穿着五颜六色的服饰，令他局促不安。
The suspended staircase, surrounded by glittering railings and filled with perfume, leads to the upper floor. He went upstairs and entered the first hall. When he saw the bustling scene, he was so frightened that he stepped back. The colorful costumes of the people made him squirm.
他觉得仿佛是恶魔把整个世界捏成了碎片，又把这些碎片莫名其妙、杂乱无章地混合在一起。淑女们闪亮的肩膀，黑色的燕尾服，枝形吊灯，各式灯台，飘飞的罗刹。
He felt as if the devil had crushed the whole world into pieces and mixed the pieces together inexplicably and chaotically. He felt as if the devil had crushed the whole world into pieces and mixed the pieces together inexplicably and chaotically. The ladies' shining shoulders, black tuxedos, chandeliers, various lampstands, and flying gauze.
薄纱的缎带，以及从华丽的月台栏杆里面探出头来的低音提琴，这一切都令他耀眼欲花。他一下子目睹了如此之多燕尾服上挂着徽章的受人敬重的老头和半老头。
The gossamer ribbons and the double bass peeking out from the ornate bandstand railings, all of this made him dazzling. He suddenly saw so many respectable old and middle-aged men with badges on their tailcoats.
目睹了如此之多轻盈地、傲然的和优雅的在香木地板上迈步或者一排排坐着的淑女，他耳闻着如此之多的法国话和英国话，而且身穿黑色燕尾服的年轻人显得气度高雅。
He saw so many ladies walking lightly, proudly and gracefully on the parquet floor or sitting in rows. He heard so many French and English words, and the young men in black tailcoats seemed elegant manner.
无论是说话还是沉默，都神态庄严，不多说一句闲话，庄重地说说笑话，谦恭地微微笑着，蓄着精美的络腮胡子，精巧地伸出一双漂亮的手来整理领带。淑女们则婀娜多姿。
Whether speaking or being silent, they look solemn, do not say a word of gossip, tell jokes solemnly, smile humbly, wear beautiful beards, and deftly stretch out a pair of beautiful hands to arrange their ties. The ladies are graceful. 沉浸在洋洋自得和陶然欲醉的心境之中，低垂着迷人的眸子，真是。然而皮斯卡略夫却是一副恭顺的样子，惶恐不安地倚在一根圆柱旁，显得手足无措。这时 Immersed in a state of complacency and intoxication, with his charming eyes lowered, it was really. However, Piskarev looked submissive, leaning anxiously against a column, looking at a loss. At this time,
众人围着一群翩翩起舞的人们，他们裹着巴黎织造的透明薄纱，穿着轻薄如云的衣衫，快速地旋舞着。他们伸出闪亮的仙足，随意地踏着香木地板，比足不着地更添几分飘逸。然而
The crowd gathered around a group of dancing people. They were wrapped in transparent tulle woven in Paris and wore clothes as thin as clouds, dancing quickly. They stretched out their shining feet and stepped on the parquet floor casually, making them even more elegant than if they were not even touching the ground. However,
其中有一人超凡脱俗，穿着尤其俏丽多姿，光彩照人。他的整个装束巧扮入时，有一种难以形容的美，而且似乎这并非他的刻意追求，而是一种自然天成。他随意望着围观的人群。
One of them was extraordinary, dressed in a particularly pretty and dazzling way. Her entire attire was fashionable and had an indescribable beauty, and it seemed that this was not a deliberate pursuit on her part, but a natural outcome. She looked casually at the crowd of spectators.
似乎在有意无意之间，妩媚动人的长睫毛不经意地低垂下来。当那轻微的阴影在低头的一瞬遮蔽她那迷人的前额时，白皙耀眼的面庞就格外引人注目。皮斯卡略夫使劲拨开众人。
As if intentionally or unintentionally, her charming long eyelashes lowered inadvertently. When the slight shadow covered her charming forehead the moment she lowered her head, her fair and dazzling face became particularly eye-catching. Piskarev pushed the crowd away with all his strength.
想要仔细看个清楚，可是十分遗憾的是，一个长着满头黑卷发的大脑袋不时地把他挡住了，而且人群把他夹在当中，进退不得。他又唯恐不小心推搡了3等文官之类的官员。不过
He wanted to take a closer look. However, it was a pity that a big head with a full head of black curly hair blocked her from time to time, and the crowd trapped him in the middle, unable to move forward or retreat, and he was afraid of being accidentally pushed. Official, he wanted to take a closer look. However, it was a pity that a big head with a full head of black curly hair blocked her from time to time, and the crowd trapped him in the middle, unable to move forward or retreat, and he was afraid of being accidentally pushed. Officials such as third-class civil servants. But
他到底挤到前面去了，望一眼身上的衣服，想要整理的体面一些。天啊，这是怎么回事？他穿的竟然是一件长礼服，而且尽是颜料的斑斑污迹。他走得太匆忙，竟忘了换一件体面些的衣裳。
He finally squeezed to the front, took a look at his clothes, and wanted to tidy up a bit more decently. Oh my God, what's going on? What he was wearing was a formal coat, and it was stained with paint. He left in such a hurry that he forgot to change into more decent clothes.
他不由得低下头来，脸一下子红到了耳根，真想找个地缝藏身，可是却无处可藏。衣着华丽的少年侍从们像一堵墙似的挡在他的身后。
He couldn't help lowering his head. His face suddenly turned red to the roots of his ears. He really wanted to find a crack in the ground to hide, but there was nowhere to hide. The young attendants in gorgeous clothes blocked him behind like a wall.
他已经打算要远远地离开长着妩媚的前额和睫毛的美人了。他惊恐不安地抬起眼来，想知道他是否在看他。天啊！他正好站在面前，可是这是怎么回事呢？怎么回事呢？是他。
He was already planning to stay far away from the beauty with the charming forehead and eyelashes. He raised his eyes in alarm, wondering if she was looking at him. Oh my God! She was standing right in front of her, but what was going on? What's going on? It's her.
他差不多是大声嚷了起来。一点不错，正是他，就是在涅瓦大街相遇又伴送他回到住处的那个女郎。这时，他微微抬起睫毛，用明亮的目光瞟了一眼大家。哎呀，多么漂亮！
He practically shouted. Yes, it was her, the girl she met on Nevsky Prospect and escorted her back to her residence. At this time, she raised her eyelashes slightly and glanced at everyone with bright eyes. Oh my! How beautiful!
他说到这里便打住了，连气都喘不过来。他扫视了一圈，大家都争先恐后地想得到他的垂顾，可是他却露出困倦和冷漠之色，很快把目光移开，跟皮斯卡略夫相对而视。啊，人间的天堂！
He stopped here and couldn't even breathe. She glanced around, and everyone was vying to get her attention, but she looked sleepy and indifferent, and quickly looked away, facing Piskarev. Ah, heaven on earth!
极乐的世界，上帝啊，给他经受这一切的力量吧！生命就要离他而去，他会要毁掉和戕害自己的灵魂。他做了一个暗示，不是手势，也不是点头示意，不是。
A world of bliss. God, give him the strength to endure all this. Life will leave him, and he will destroy and kill his own soul. She made a hint, not a gesture, not a nod, not.
他那双勾魂摄魄的眼睛透露出一丝微妙而隐约的表情，传达了这一信号，谁也无法觉察到。可是他却看出来了，领悟到了。一支舞曲延续了很久，已经倦怠的乐曲似乎就要静息下来了。
Her enchanting eyes revealed a subtle and vague expression, conveying this signal. No one could detect it, but he saw it and understood it. A dance lasted for a long time. The tired music seemed to be about to rest.
忽然又高声扬起，尖叫刺耳，铿然轰响，终于一曲终了。他坐下来，胸脯在轻盈的薄纱下起伏颤动，他的一只纤手，天啊，多么纤巧的手，垂落在膝盖上，握住身子底下轻薄的衣裳。
Suddenly the loud voice rose again. The scream was harsh, and there was a loud roar. Finally the song ended. She sat down, her breasts heaving and quivering under the light gauze. One of her delicate hands, gosh, what a delicate hand, fell on her knees, holding the light clothes underneath her.
那衣裳垫在身子下面，仿佛也发出悦耳的音响。衣裳的淡淡的血青色把那只纤手衬托得格外分明。只要能抚摸一下这手，就心满意足了，再也别无他求，即使是想一想，也太貌美了。
The clothes seemed to make a pleasant sound when cushioned under the body, and the light snow-green color of the clothes highlighted the delicate hand. As long as I can touch this hand, I will be satisfied. Nothing more could be asked for. It would be too presumptuous to even think about it.
他站在他的椅子后面，不敢开口说话，也不敢大声透气。您觉得烦闷吗？他说道。我也觉得闷了。我看得出来，您在恨我。他补了一句，垂下长长的睫毛。恨您？您说我。皮斯卡略夫心慌意乱。
He stood behind her chair, not daring to speak or breathe loudly. Are you bored? She said. I feel bored too. I can see that you hate me. She added, lowering her long eyelashes. Hate you? Are you talking about me? Piskarev was flustered.
本想再说下去，那就会说出一大堆语无伦次的话来。不过这时，一个说话俏皮而风趣，头上卷着一束蓬起的凤头的侍从官走了过来。他高兴地露出一排相当洁白的牙齿。
I wanted to continue talking, which would lead to a lot of incoherent words, but then an attendant who spoke playfully and interestingly and had a bunch of fluffy crests on his head came over. He happily showed off a row of fairly white teeth.
说的俏皮话，句句都像锋利的钉子一样扎进他的心里。所幸的是，终于旁边有人找侍从官询问什么事情了。真烦人！他抬起天使般的眼睛望望他，说：“我坐到大厅的那一头去，你也过来吧。”
The witty words she spoke pierced into his heart like sharp nails. Fortunately, someone finally came to ask the attendant about something. How annoying, she said, looking up at him with her angelic eyes. I'll sit at the other end of the hall. You come over too.
他挤进人群里，随即不见了。他像疯了似的推开众人，也跟着到了那儿。是的，正是他。他端坐着，宛如女皇，超凡脱俗，艳压群芳，左右顾盼，正在找他呢。您来了，他轻声说道。我不想瞒您。
She squeezed into the crowd and disappeared. He pushed away everyone like crazy and followed them there. Yes, it was her. She was sitting like a queen, otherworldly and gorgeous, looking around, looking for him. You're here, she said softly. I don't want to hide it from you.
我们邂逅相遇的情形，您一定觉得奇怪吧？您或许以为我是属于您见到的那种下流无耻的人吧？您会觉得我的行为很怪诞。不过我可以告诉您一个秘密，他凝视着他的眼睛说道。
You must find it strange how we met by chance. You may think that I am one of those nasty and shameless people you see, right? You may think my behavior is strange, but I can tell you a secret, she said, gazing into his eyes.
您能永远不泄露出去吗？哦，一定，一定，一定不泄露。可是，这时一个上了年纪的人走进前来，操着皮斯卡略夫听不懂的语言跟他说什么来着，然后向他伸出胳膊。
Can you never leak it? Oh, definitely. Must. It must not be leaked. But then an older man came up to her, spoke to her in a language that Piskarev could not understand, and then stretched out his arm to her.
他用恳求的目光望了一眼皮斯卡略夫，示意他留在原地，等他回来。可是他一时急不可耐，无论是谁的吩咐都听不进，即便是他说的话也不能从命了。他立即跟随而去，然而
She glanced at Piskarev with a pleading look, signaling him to stay where he was and wait for her return. But he was so impatient that he could not obey anyone's orders, not even those she said. He immediately followed, however.
人群熙熙攘攘，终于把他们隔开了。他再没有看见那袭雪青白的衣裙，焦急不安地穿过一个个的房间，十分莽撞地推搡着迎面走来的人。然而
The bustling crowd finally separated them. He never saw the snow-white dress again. He walked anxiously through the rooms, pushing people who were coming towards him recklessly, but 一间间房里，只见社会名流坐在那里打桥牌，一片鸦雀无声。在一间房子的角落里，几个上了年纪的人在争论从文习武孰优孰劣的问题。在另一个角落里 In room after room, only celebrities could be seen sitting there playing bridge, and there was total silence. In the corner of a house, several elderly people were arguing about the merits of studying literature and martial arts. In another corner,
穿着考究的燕尾服的人们对一个多产诗人的多卷诗集轻率地发表评论。皮斯卡略夫看到一位相貌堂堂的长者捏着一个身穿燕尾服的人的纽扣，对他的论断提出十分公允的意见。
People in well-dressed tuxedos make flippant comments about a prolific poet's multiple volumes of poetry. Piskarev saw a dignified-looking elder pinching the buttons of a man in a tuxedo and giving him a very fair opinion of his judgment.
可是对方却粗暴地把他推到一旁，甚至无视他脖子上挂着的颇有来历的勋章。皮斯卡略夫奔向另一间房里，那里没有他的身影。又急奔第三间房，仍然不见人影。他在哪里呢？我要见他。
But the other party roughly pushed him aside, even ignoring the prestigious medal hanging around his neck. Piskarev ran to another room. She was not there. I hurried to the third room. Still no one was there. Where is she? I want to see her.
唉，我不看他一眼就活不成了。我要听听他的心里话。然而他四处寻找，全都枉然。他烦躁不安，疲惫不堪，畏缩在一个角落里，望着众人，两眼发酸，四周的一切渐渐模糊起来。最后
Alas, I cannot live without looking at her. I want to hear what's in her heart. However, he searched everywhere in vain. He was restless and exhausted. He cowered in a corner and looked at everyone. His eyes were sore, and everything around him gradually became blurred. Finally,
他的眼前分明现出了房间的四壁。他抬起眼来，只见面前摆着一个烛台，灯火在烛台的深处就要熄灭了。一支蜡烛点完了，蜡油流淌到桌面上。原来他睡着了。天啊，多美的梦！
the four walls of the room were clearly visible before his eyes. He raised his eyes and saw a candlestick in front of him. The light was about to go out deep in the candlestick. One candle was lit. Wax flowed onto the table. Turns out he was asleep. Oh my God, what a dream!
干嘛要醒过来呢？干嘛不再等一会儿？他兴许又会回来呢。恼人的曙色闪着令人不快的暗淡的辉光，照进他的窗口。房间沉浸在一片灰暗、模糊的杂乱光影里。唉，现实多么的丑恶！
Why wake up? Why not wait a little longer? Maybe she will come back. The annoying twilight shone through his window with an unpleasant dim glow. The room was immersed in a dark, blurry mess of light and shadow. Alas, how ugly the reality is.
他为什么要跟梦境对着来呢？他匆忙地脱了衣服，躺到床上，盖上被子，一心想短暂地追回那已逝去的梦境。果然，他立刻又做起梦来了。可是他梦见的完全不是他想要看到的情景。
Why does it have to be opposite to the dream? He hurriedly took off his clothes, lay down on the bed, covered himself with a quilt, and wanted to briefly recover the lost dream. Why does it have to be opposite to the dream? He hurriedly took off his clothes, lay down on the bed, covered himself with a quilt, and wanted to briefly recover the lost dream. Sure enough, he immediately started dreaming again, but what he dreamed about was not at all what he wanted to see.
一会儿是皮罗戈夫叼着烟斗来了，一会儿又见到美术学院的守门人，一会儿遇到一个四等文官， 一忽儿又梦见他给画过肖像的一个芬兰女人的脑袋等等乱七八糟的梦境。
One moment Pyrogov came with a pipe in his mouth. The next he saw the gatekeeper of the Academy of Fine Arts. The next he met a fourth-class civil servant. The next he dreamed of the head of a Finnish woman he had painted a portrait of, and so on and so forth. Of dreams.
他一直睡到正午时分，还想再入梦乡，可是他再也没有出现。多么渴望他再展片刻绝代的姿容，多么渴望他的轻盈的步履再妥妥地响起片刻。
He slept until noon, still trying to fall asleep again, but she never appeared again. How I long for her to show off her unparalleled beauty for a moment. How I long for her light steps to clatter for a moment again.
多么渴望她那光洁如天外的白雪一般的裸露的臂膀能再在她的眼前闪动。他撩开了被褥，忘记了一切，沮丧而绝望地呆坐着，一心只回忆那逝去的梦境。他无心去做任何事情。
How he longed for her bare arms, as smooth as the white snow in the sky, to flash before his eyes again. He lifted up the quilt, forgot about everything, and sat there in frustration and despair, focusing only on recalling the lost dream. He had no intention of doing anything.
两眼木然无情，了无生气地凝望朝向院子的窗户，那里一个浑身脏兮兮的运水夫正在把快要结冰的水倒出来，一个沿街叫卖的商贩扯着山羊般的嗓门连声吆喝：“有救医卖吗？”
His eyes were dull and emotionless, staring lifelessly at the window facing the yard, where a dirty waterman was pouring out water that was about to freeze, and a street vendor shouted in a goat-like voice, "Are there any used clothes for sale?"
这日常的和真实的东西，他听来倒是觉得古怪。他就这样一直坐到天已入暮，又贪睡地倒在床上，辗转反侧，好久难以成眠，但终于还是睡着了。又做了一个梦，一个下流的、恶心的梦。
This everyday and real thing sounded strange to him. He sat like this until dusk fell, then fell asleep on the bed. Tossing and turning, it was hard to fall asleep for a long time, but finally I fell asleep. I had another dream, a nasty, disgusting dream.
上帝啊，怜悯怜悯我吧，哪怕让我见他一会儿，1分钟也行。他又等待着夜晚的来临，又睡着了，又梦见了一个官员。他既是官员，又是演奏大管的人，啊，多么令人难受！他终于出现了。
Lord, have mercy on me, let me see her even for a moment, even for a minute. He waited for the night to come again, fell asleep again, and dreamed of an official, who was both an official and a bassoon player. Oh, how uncomfortable. She appeared at last.
他的小脑袋和满头卷发，他凝眸相看，啊，只一眨眼功夫，又是一片迷雾，又是一场乱梦。最后，追寻梦境成了他的生活。从这时起，他的整个生活发生了奇怪的变化。可以说，他是醒时睡着。
Her little head and her head of curly hair, she looked at each other, oh, for the blink of an eye. Another fog, another chaotic dream. Finally, the pursuit of dreams became his life, and from that moment on, his whole life took a strange turn. He fell asleep, so to speak, while he was awake.
梦里不眠。如果有人看见他默默无言地坐在空桌的旁边，或者沿街走着，那么准会以为他是梦游症患者，或者是被酒精毁了的人。他的眼神茫然若失。
Sleepless in dreams. If someone saw him sitting silently at an empty table or walking along the street, they would think that he was a sleepwalker or someone ruined by alcohol. His eyes were blank and lost.
生来就有的精神恍惚的毛病，现在更加重了，横蛮地抹去了他脸上一切感情的流露和变化。只有到了夜里，他才又有了生气。这种状况耗损了他的精力，最后他梦也做不成了。
The mental disorder he was born with became even more severe now, brutally erasing all expressions and changes of emotion on his face. Only at night did he feel alive again. This situation drained his energy, and in the end he couldn't dream anymore.
这竟成了他最大的痛苦。为了挽回这唯一拥有的东西，他想方设法要重圆好梦。他听人说，有一种办法可以重温旧梦，只要服用鸦片就能办到。可是到哪里去弄鸦片呢？
This turned out to be his greatest pain. In order to save the only thing he owned, he tried every means to regain his dream. He had heard that there was a way to relive old dreams. All he had to do was take opium. But where to get opium?
他想起了一个开披巾店的波斯人，此人几乎每次见面都求他画一幅美人图。他拿定主意去找波斯人帮忙，估计他肯定有这种鸦片。波斯人端坐在沙发上，盘着腿接待了他。
He remembered a Persian who owned a shawl shop. This man asked him to draw a picture of a beauty almost every time he met. He made up his mind to find help from the Persians, who must have this kind of opium. The Persian sat on the sofa with his legs crossed and received him.
你要鸦片做什么用？波斯人问道。皮斯卡略夫向他诉说了失眠的苦况。好吧，我给你一些鸦片，不过你得给我画一张美人图。要画一个绝色美人，乌黑的眉毛，像有橄榄一样的大眼睛。
What do you want the opium for? The Persian asked. Piskarev told him about his insomnia. Okay, I'll give you some opium, but you have to draw me a picture of a beauty. I want to draw a stunning beauty. Black eyebrows, big eyes like olives.
而我就躺在他的身边，抽着烟斗。听明白吗？要画一个十分漂亮的，一个美人。皮斯卡略夫全都答应了。波斯人出去一会儿，拿着一只盛着发黑的液体的小罐子回来。
And I was lying next to her, smoking my pipe. Do you understand? I want to draw a very beautiful one. What a beauty! Piskarev agreed to everything. The Persian went out for a while and came back with a small jar containing a black liquid.
小心地倒了一点在另一只小罐子里，然后交给皮斯卡略夫，嘱咐他要对水喝，每次不得超过7滴。他贪婪地抓起这个无比珍贵，可说是金不换的小罐子，急急忙忙地跑回家去。
Carefully pour a little into another small jar, then give it to Piskarev, telling him to mix it with water and drink it, no more than 7 drops at a time. He greedily grabbed this extremely precious little jar, which could not be exchanged for gold, and hurried home.
回到家里，他倒了几滴在盛着水的杯子里，一口吞下，倒头便睡。天哪，多么的快意！是他，又见到他了。不过已经是另外的样子。啊！他已坐在明亮的村舍的窗户旁边，多么妩媚！
When he got home, he poured a few drops into a glass of water, swallowed it in one gulp, and fell asleep. Oh my God, what a pleasure! It's her. See her again. However, it is already something else. Ah, she sat leaning against the window of the bright cottage. How charming!
她的装扮是那样朴素无华，足以唤起诗人的忧思遐想。她的头上的发饰，天啊，那发饰多么简朴，跟整个的人又是多么相配。短短的三角头巾轻巧地披在她那端正的脖颈上。
Her dress is so simple and unpretentious that it can arouse the poet's reverie. The hairstyle on her head, gosh, how simple it was, and how it matched the whole person. The short triangular headscarf was draped lightly around her straight neck.
整个的人淡雅淳朴，身上的一切蕴含着一种神秘的、莫名的韵味。她的优雅的步态多么好看，款款而行的脚步声和朴素无华的衣裙的窸窣声多么悦耳动听。
The whole person is elegant and simple, and everything about him contains a mysterious and inexplicable charm. How beautiful is her graceful gait! How sweet is the sound of walking footsteps and the rustling of simple dresses!
她那拢着兽毛围绕的镯子衣的手多么可爱！她含着眼泪对他说：“不要看不起我，我根本不是你以为的那种人。瞧瞧我吧，仔细的瞧瞧我。您说，难道你以为我会做那种事情吗？啊，不，不。”
How cute is her hand holding the bracelet surrounded by animal hair. She said to him with tears in her eyes, "Don't look down on me. I am not at all what you think I am. Look at me carefully, and you say, did you think I would do such a thing? Ah, no, no."
有谁敢那么想？就让他，可是他却醒了，肝肠寸断，泪水盈眶。一当时流行的一种装饰品，还不如你压根不曾来到人间，不曾活在这世上。
Whoever dares to think that way, let him. But he woke up, heartbroken and tears filling his eyes. A popular decoration at the time. It would be better if you never came to this world at all. Never lived in this world.
只不过是才华横溢的画家笔下的一幅画，倒好些。我就一步也不离开画布，永远望着你，亲吻你。我会把你当作最美好的憧憬，生死相依，呼吸与共，那样我就会无比幸福。
It would be better if it were just a painting by a talented painter. I will never leave the canvas, always looking at you and kissing you. I will regard you as my most beautiful vision, depend on you for life and death, and share our breath and breath. Then I will be extremely happy.
我也就没有别的奢望了。我在睡前醒后都会像呼唤守护天使一样呼唤你的名字。一旦需要描画美好和神圣之物的时候，我会等待你的出现。可是现在，多么可怕的生活！
I have no other extravagant hopes. I will call your name like a guardian angel before I go to bed and after I wake up. Whenever I need to paint something beautiful and sacred, I will wait for your appearance. But now, what a terrible life!
他活着又有什么好处？难道一个疯子的生命能给从前爱过他的亲友带来欢心吗？天啊，我们过的是什么日子？梦想和现实总是争执不休，类似的思绪一直不停地缠磨着他。
What good does she gain by living? Can the life of a madman bring joy to his relatives and friends who once loved him? My God, what a life we have! Dreams and reality are always at odds. Similar thoughts kept bothering him.
他任什么也不想了， 几乎不吃不喝，急切而狂热地期盼着夜晚和着迷的幻梦的来临。这种始终不变的痴迷支配了他的整个身心和想象力。
He thought of nothing, scarcely ate or drank, and looked forward eagerly and feverishly to the coming of night and his enchanted dreams. This constant obsession dominated his whole body, mind, and imagination.
以致那心爱的模样几乎每天都出现在他的眼前，而且总是与现实格格不入，因为他的思绪完全像孩子一般单纯。在这些梦幻中，那个女郎也变得更加纯美，而且完全变了样子。
As a result, that beloved image appeared in front of him almost every day, and it was always incompatible with reality, because his thoughts were as simple as a child's. In these dreams, the girl became more pure and beautiful, and completely changed her appearance.
连连服用鸦片，使他的思绪更加亢奋起来。如果说有人坠入了情网，爱得极度癫狂，爱得十分热切，爱得痛苦万分，爱得五内俱焚，爱得魂不守舍的话，那么这个不幸者就非他莫属。
Taking opium continuously made his thoughts more excited. If someone falls in love, loves madly, loves passionately, loves so painfully, loves so much that everything inside is burned, and loves so much that he cannot leave his soul, this unfortunate person must be him.
其中的一个梦最使他欣喜万分，他梦见了自己的画室，非常开心，端着调色板，十分投入地坐在那儿。他也在画室里，已经成了他的妻子了。他坐在他的身旁。
One of the dreams made him extremely happy. He dreamed of his studio, very happy, holding a palette, and sitting there with great concentration. She is also in the studio. She has become his wife. She sat next to him.
迷人的胳膊肘就支在他的椅背上，看他作画。他那双矫情而困倦的眼睛里透出一缕无比幸福的表情。房间里的一切洋溢着幸福安谧的气氛，窗明几净，井然有序。天哪！
Charming's elbows rested on the back of his chair, watching him paint. There was an expression of incomparable happiness in her delicate and sleepy eyes. Everything in the room was filled with an atmosphere of happiness and tranquility. The windows were bright, clean, and orderly. Oh my gosh!
他把可爱的小脑袋依偎在他的胸前，他从未做过如此甜美的梦。梦醒之后，他觉得神清气爽，也不像以前那样慵懒无力了。脑子里闪过一些奇怪的念头，也许他暗忖着他是突遭厄运。
She nestled her cute little head on his chest. He had never had such a sweet dream. She nestled her cute little head on his chest. He had never had such a sweet dream. After waking up from the dream, he felt refreshed and not as lazy and weak as before. Some strange thoughts flashed through my mind. Perhaps, he thought to himself, she suffered a sudden misfortune.
身不由己的沦落风尘的，也许他内心已是懊悔莫及，也许他自己也渴望跳出火坑。难道就眼瞪瞪地看着他毁了而无动于衷吗？
She could not help but fall into the world of prostitution. Perhaps, she was deeply regretful in her heart. Perhaps, she herself also longed to jump out of the pit of fire. Should he just stare at her ruin and remain indifferent?
要知道，只要伸出一只援手，就可以把他从水深火热之中解救出来呀。他神思远游起来。没有人认识我，他自言自语说，而且别人管不着我，我也不管别人的事。只要他真心悔改，重新做人。
You know that as long as you extend a helping hand, you can rescue her from the dire straits. He began to wander in his mind. You know that as long as you extend a helping hand, you can rescue her from the dire straits. He began to wander in his mind. No one knows me, he said to himself, and others can't care about me, and I don't care about other people's affairs. As long as she truly repented and turned a new leaf.
我就娶她，我一定要娶她，总比许多人娶女管家，甚至于娶下贱的荡妇要强得多。而我的这一举动是无私的，甚至是伟大的。我是把一个绝色美人还给人世。
I will marry her. I must marry her. It is much better than many people marrying a housekeeper or even a lowly slut. And my move was selfless, even great. I am returning a stunning beauty to the world.
他拟定了这么一个轻浮的计划，觉得脸上陡然升起了一阵红晕。他走到镜子跟前，只见双颊深陷，脸色苍白，不由得感到骇然。他仔细地打扮了一番，洗了脸，抿平头发。
Having drawn up such a frivolous plan, he felt a blush suddenly rise on his face. When he walked to the mirror, he saw his cheeks were sunken and his face was pale, and he couldn't help but feel horrified. He dressed up carefully, washed his face and smoothed his hair.
穿上一件新的燕尾服和实心的背心，披了一件斗篷，便走到了街上。他吸了一口清新的空气，心里觉得神清气爽，犹如一个久病初愈的病人终于走出门来似的。当他走进那条街时，
Putting on a new tuxedo, a fashionable vest, and a cloak, he walked out into the street. He took a breath of fresh air and felt refreshed, as if a patient who had just recovered from a long illness finally walked out of the door. As he approached the street,
心不由得砰砰直跳，因为自从那次不幸的邂逅之后，还一直没有来过。他久久地寻找那幢房子，仿佛是记不起来了。在街上来回走了2趟，不知道该在哪一幢房子跟前停下来。终于，
my heart was pounding involuntarily because I hadn't been there since that unfortunate encounter. He looked for the house for a long time. He seemed unable to remember it. I walked up and down the street twice, not knowing which house to stop at. Finally,
他觉得其中一幢房子有点像，于是快步奔上楼去，敲了敲门。门开了，有一个人迎上前来。是谁呀？是他的意中人，心中密藏的美人，理想之画的模特儿，那样揪心。
He thought one of the houses looked a bit like it. So, I quickly ran upstairs and knocked on the door. The door opened, and a person came forward to greet me. Who is it? She is the one he likes, the beauty hidden in his heart, the model for his ideal painting, so heart-wrenching.
那样痛苦又那样甜蜜的日思夜想的人儿，他就站在他的面前，他浑身索索的颤抖，心里一阵狂喜，身子虚弱的几乎站不稳。他面对面站着，仍然风情万种，尽管两眼睡意朦胧。
Someone who is so painful and so sweet that I think about day and night. She stood in front of him. He was trembling all over. His heart was filled with ecstasy, and he was so weak that he could hardly stand. She stood face to face, still charming, even though her eyes were sleepy.
面庞略显苍白而不那么鲜丽可人，然而她依然楚楚动人。哦，他一看是皮斯卡略夫，大声喊道，揉揉眼睛，那已经是午后2点了。您干嘛那天要溜走呀？他浑身无力地坐到椅子上。
Her face was slightly pale and not so beautiful, but she was still charming. "Oh!" she shouted when she saw it was Piskarev, rubbing her eyes. It was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon. "Why did you run away that day?" He sat down on the chair limply.
怔怔地望着他。我刚刚醒来，早上7点钟才把我送回家来。我真喝醉了。他微笑着又补充了一句：“啊，你倒不如是个哑巴，压根儿就说不出话来的好，何苦说这些话来呢？”
Staring at her blankly. "I just woke up. They didn't bring me home until 7 o'clock in the morning. I was really drunk," she added with a smile. "Ah, you might as well be mute and unable to speak at all. Why bother saying these words?"
他忽然把生活的全部底细都给他看了。然而，尽管如此，他还是压住心头的气恼，决心尝试一下，看看他的规劝对他能否起点作用。他鼓起勇气。
She suddenly revealed to him all the details of her life. However, despite this, he still suppressed the anger in his heart and determined to give it a try to see if his persuasion would have an effect on her. He took courage.
用颤抖然而却满怀热情的声音说明，他已深陷火坑之中。他神情专注地听着他说，同时流露出一脸惊愕的神色。那是我们通常见到出乎意料和十分蹊跷的事情时才会那么做的。
Her trembling but passionate voice showed that she was deep in the fire. She listened to him intently, with that look of astonishment which we usually do when we see something unexpected and very strange.
他浅浅一笑，瞟了一眼坐在角落里的女伴，那女伴已不再踢镜梳子，也仔细地听着新来的说教者还说些什么。的确，我很穷。皮斯卡略夫做了长时间的和富有教义的一番规劝之后，
She smiled lightly and glanced at the female companion sitting in the corner. The female companion was no longer cleaning her comb and was listening carefully to what the new preacher had to say. "It is true that I am poor," said Piskarev after a long and instructive exhortation.
最后说道：“不过，我们可以劳动为生，我们可以同心协力改善我们的生活处境。最大的快乐莫过于自食其力。我可以作画，你就坐在我的身边，鼓励我，刺绣或者做点别的手工活。”
Finally, he said, "However, we can work for a living. We can work together to improve our living conditions. The greatest happiness is to make a living by ourselves. I can paint, and you can sit beside me, encourage me, embroider or do something else, handwork.
我们也就衣食无愁了。那怎么行？他一脸鄙夷的神色打断他的话说：“我又不是洗衣服和女裁缝，干嘛要干活呢？”天哪！这番话流露出他对整个卑贱下流的生活的贪恋。
We will have enough food and clothing. How can that be done? She interrupted him with a look of disdain on her face. I'm not a washerwoman or seamstress, so why do I have to work? Oh my God! These words revealed her lust for the whole mean and obscene life.
那是与淫荡终日为伴的，充满着空虚与无聊的生活呀！您就娶我吧。那个至今仍坐在角落里默不作声的女伴，厚颜无耻地接过话头，说道：“我嫁给您，就这么坐着。”说着
It was a life full of emptiness and boredom, accompanied by lust all day long. Just marry me. The female companion, who was still sitting silently in the corner, took over the conversation shamelessly and said, I will marry you and just sit like this. Said.
他那令人可比的脸上扮了一个傻乎乎的怪相，逗得那美人哈哈大笑。啊，这太放肆了，真令人难以忍受。他痴痴呆呆，神情木然地抬脚就走。他神志模糊了，稀里糊涂，漫无目的，视而不见。
A silly grimace appeared on her contemptible face, which made the beauty laugh. Ah, this is so presumptuous. It's unbearable. He walked away in a daze and with a numb expression. He was confused, aimless, blind.
听而不闻，无知无觉，游荡了一整天。谁也不知道他在什么地方过了夜没有，只是在第二天，他才凭着模模糊糊的下意识回到了自己的住处，面容憔悴，神色可怕，头发乱蓬蓬的。
Listening but not hearing, unaware, wandering all day long. No one knew where he spent the night. It was only the next day that he returned to his residence with a vague subconscious, looking haggard, looking terrible, and with disheveled hair.
一副神经狂乱的样子。他把自己锁在房里，不让任何人进去，也不要什么东西。4天过去了，锁着的房门一次也没有打开过。又过了1个星期，房门依然深锁着。人们拥到房门口。
He looked like a nervous wreck. He locked himself in his room, letting no one in, and asking for nothing. For days passed, and the locked door was not opened once. Another week passed, and the door was still locked. People crowded to the door of the room.
大声呼唤他，可是没有一点声息。最后把房门撬开了，发现他切断喉管，已经死了。血迹斑斑的刮脸刀跌落在地板上，两手痉挛地张开着，样子扭曲得十分怕人。
She called him loudly, but there was no sound. Finally she pried open the door and found that he had cut his throat and was dead. The bloody razor fell to the floor. His hands were spread out convulsively, and his appearance was twisted and scary.
可以推知他的手没有找准地方，受过长时间的折磨，那颗有罪的灵魂才最后出窍。可怜的皮斯卡略夫就这样一命呜呼了。这狂热的激情的牺牲品，一个温顺、胆怯、谦恭、天真的人。
It can be inferred that his hands were not in the right place and he suffered a long period of torture before the guilty soul finally came out of the body. Thus perished poor Piskarev, the victim of a wild passion, a meek, timid, humble, and innocent man.
他怀有才能的火花，或许随着时光的推移，会迸发出熊熊的火焰来。没有人为他哭泣。在他的遗体旁，除了一个寻长的身影和一个法医的冷漠的面孔之外，再没有别的人。
He harbors a spark of talent that may, in time, burst into flames. No one cried for him. Beside his body, there was no one except the figure of a patrolman and the cold face of a medical examiner.
甚至也没有举行宗教仪式。他的棺木被悄悄地运往奥赫塔，只有一个看门的士兵跟在棺木后面哭泣，那也只是因为他多喝了一瓶伏特加的缘故。
There was not even a religious ceremony, and his coffin was carried quietly to Okhta. Only a soldier watching the gate followed the coffin and wept, and that was only because he drank an extra bottle of vodka.
就连皮罗戈夫中尉也不曾前来看一眼这不幸而可怜的人的遗容，而在生前，中尉对他可是呵护有加的呀。然而，皮罗戈夫中尉是完全顾不上这事了，他正忙着一件十分重要的事情。
Even Lieutenant Pyrogov did not come to see the remains of this unfortunate and pitiful man, but the lieutenant took good care of him during his lifetime. However, Lieutenant Pyrogov could not care less. He was busy with something very important.
现在我们就来说说他吧。我不爱碰到尸体和死人。当长长的送殡行列穿过我走的道路，一个打扮得像托钵修士的残废士兵，左手闻着鼻烟，右手擎着火把走过时，我总觉得挺别扭的。
Now let's talk about him. I don't like to meet corpses and dead people. When a long funeral procession crosses the road I am walking on, and a disabled soldier dressed like a mendicant monk walks past, sniffing snuff with his left hand and holding a torch in his right hand, I always feel quite awkward.
只要看到装饰华丽的灵柩车和盖着天鹅绒罩布的棺木，我总免不了有一种无奈的感觉。然而，当我看见运货马车拉着穷人无遮无盖的红色棺材，
As long as I see the ornately decorated coffin and the coffin covered with velvet cloth, I can't help but feel helpless. However, when I see the carriage pulling the red coffin of the poor man with no cover,
只有一个女乞婆碰巧在十字路口遇着，因为无所事事而慢慢吞吞地跟着走去的情景时，我那无奈的心境便掺上几分哀伤。
when I happened to meet a female beggar at a crossroads and followed her slowly because she had nothing to do, my helpless mood was mixed with a bit of sadness.
我们在前面似乎讲到皮罗戈夫跟可怜的皮斯卡略夫分了手，急忙去追金发女郎的地方了。这金发女郎是长得体态轻盈、相貌相当漂亮的妞。
We seem to have talked about the place where Pyrogov broke up with poor Piskarev and hurriedly chased the blonde. This blonde is a lithe girl with a pretty face.
她在每一家商店的门前都要驻足一会儿，出神地端详橱窗里摆着的宽腰带、三角头巾、耳环、手套以及别的精巧事物，不停地扭着身子，东张西望，又频频回首。宝贝。
She would stop for a while in front of each shop, looking at the wide belts, triangular headscarves, earrings, gloves, and other exquisite accessories displayed in the window, twisting her body, looking here and there, and looking back frequently. Baby.
你可跑不出我的掌心了，皮罗戈夫十分自信地说，继续紧追不舍，竖起大衣的领子来遮着脸，免得撞见熟人难堪。说到这里，不妨让读者了解一下皮罗戈夫是一个什么样的人物。不过
You can't escape from my grasp, Pyrogov said very confidently, continuing to pursue him, raising the collar of his coat to cover his face, so as not to embarrass his acquaintances. At this point, it might as well let the readers understand what kind of character Pyrogov is. But
在说到皮罗戈夫是一个什么样的人物之前，不妨谈谈皮罗戈夫所属的那个社交圈子。那里有一些军官，他们在彼得堡构成社会的一个中产阶级。
Before talking about what kind of person Pyrogov is, let's talk about the social circle to which Pyrogov belongs. There were some officers there, who formed a middle class of society in Petersburg.
在经过40年的惨淡经营才爬上去的5等或4等文官举行的晚会或宴会上，你总可以遇见其中的一个人。几个脸色苍白，有如彼得堡一样暗淡无光的少女，有的已错过佳期、茶桌。
You can always meet one of these people at a party or banquet held by a 5th or 4th class civil servant who climbed up the ladder after 40 years of bleak business. Several girls with pale faces, as dull as Petersburg, some of them have missed their prime dates, the tea table.
钢琴、家庭舞会，这一切总是跟一个戴着灯光下闪闪发亮的带穗肩章的人难解难分，而他又总是被贤淑的金发女郎和身着黑色燕尾服的弟兄或者亲友簇拥在中间。
Pianos, house dances, all of these are always inseparable from a man wearing tassels shining in the lights, and he is always surrounded by virtuous blondes and brothers or relatives in black tuxedos middle.
这些生性沉静的姑娘本是很难逗得开心和发笑的，真要做到这一点，要说难却是很难，要说不难也一点不难。说话既不要过于高深，也不要过于滑稽。
It is difficult to make these quiet girls happy and laugh. If you really want to do this, it is difficult to say that it is difficult, but it is not difficult at all to say that it is not difficult. Don't speak too profoundly or too comically.
只需处处添点女人爱听的零星琐事即可。在这一点上，倒是要给上面提到的先生们说句公道话，他们有一种特别的本领，可以让这些黯然失色的美人听他们说话，笑声不止。
Just add a little bit of trivia here and there that women love to hear. At this point, I would like to do justice to the gentlemen mentioned above. They have a special ability to make these eclipsed beauties laugh when they listen to them.
又喊又笑，此起彼伏，哎呀，别说了，羞不羞，把人逗死了。这常常是对他们最好的报偿。他们很少跻身到上层阶级中去，或者说根本就无缘高攀。
Shouting and laughing, one after another, oh, stop talking. I'm so embarrassed, it's making people laugh to death. This is often the best reward for them. They rarely make it into the upper class, or they simply don't have the chance to climb up.
他们是被这个社会称之为贵族的人们从那儿排挤出来的。话又说回来，他们算是有学问和有教养的人。他们喜欢谈论文学，对布尔加林一、普希金二和格列齐三赞不绝口。
They were squeezed out from there by what this society calls aristocrats. Then again, they are considered learned and educated people. They like to talk about literature and are full of praise for Bulgarin, Pushkin, and Gretsch.
却以蔑视和挖苦的口吻抨击奥尔洛夫斯。他们从不放过一次公开讲演的机会，即便是讲不记或者植树造林，也欣然应允。无论剧院上演什么剧目，你总可以见到其中有的人到场。
But he criticized Orlov with contempt and sarcasm. They never miss an opportunity to speak in public, even if it's about bookkeeping or tree planting. No matter what play is being played in the theater, you can always see someone there.
除非是上演的傻瓜费拉特卡之类的闹剧败坏了他们那爱挑剔的口味。他们是剧院的常客，是给剧院的老板们带来滚滚财源的人。他们尤其喜欢剧中插进一些精美的诗句。
Unless farces like Flacca the Fool have spoiled their fastidious tastes. They are regular visitors to the theater and bring a lot of money to the theater owners. They especially like to insert some beautiful verses into the play.
也喜欢大声吆喝着给演员们捧场。他们中间有许多人在公立学校执教或者辅导学生投考公立学校，终于攒得一笔钱购置一辆双轮轻便马车和一对马匹。这样
They also like to cheer loudly for the actors. Many of them taught in public schools or tutored students to apply for public schools. They finally saved a sum of money to buy a two-wheeled carriage and a pair of horses. So,
他们的交友圈子就越来越广了。他们终于能够娶上会弹钢琴的商人的女儿为妻， 带来10万卢布左右的现金作为陪嫁，还连上一大堆满脸大胡子的亲戚。不过呢，
Their circle of acquaintances became wider and wider. They were finally able to marry the daughter of a merchant who could play the piano. Their circle of acquaintances became wider and wider. They were finally able to marry the daughter of a merchant who could play the piano, brought about 100,000 rubles in cash as a dowry, and connected with a large number of bearded relatives. But
他们起码要爬到上校官阶才能得到这份殊荣，因为俄罗斯的大胡子们尽管浑身散发着白菜味儿，非要把女儿嫁给将军不可，至少也得嫁个上校才行。
they must at least reach the rank of colonel to receive this honor. Because even though the Russian bearded men smell like cabbage, they must marry their daughters to generals, at least to colonels.
属于这一类型的年轻人的主要特点大抵如此。不过，皮罗戈夫中尉有许多独具的才干，他朗诵起德米特里·顿斯科伊5和聪明误6中的诗句来悦耳动听。
The main characteristics of young people belonging to this type are roughly the same. However, Lieutenant Pirogov had many unique talents. He recited verses from Dmitry Donskoy and Smart Mistakes to the ears.
还有一种特殊的本领，从烟斗中一下子吐出10来个环环相接的烟圈。他说起笑话来十分风趣，说是山炮和独角兽炮就是大不一样。然而
There is also a special ability to blow out more than 10 connected smoke rings from the pipe at once. He was very funny when telling jokes, saying that there was a big difference between a mountain cannon and a unicorn cannon. However,
要一一列举命运赐予皮罗戈夫的才干是不大容易的。他喜欢对女戏子和舞女评头论足，但不像一个年轻准尉谈论他们那样尖刻刺耳。他对于不久前才提升的官阶踌躇满志。
it is not easy to enumerate the talents that fate bestowed upon Pirogov. He liked to comment on actresses and dancers, but not in the harsh way a young warrant officer would talk about them. He was very satisfied with the rank he had just been promoted to.
虽然有时躺到沙发上连声说：“哎，哎，瞎胡闹，全是瞎胡闹。我当上了中尉又怎么样呢？”然而，他却因为得了这个新头衔而暗自觉得十分的快意。他跟人交谈总要拐弯抹角地暗示这一点。
Although sometimes he would lie on the sofa and say repeatedly, "Alas! Alas! It's all nonsense, it's all nonsense. So what if I become a lieutenant?" However, he secretly felt very happy because of getting this new title. He always implies this in a roundabout way when talking to people.
有一回，他在街上遇到一个他认为举止粗俗的路士，便立刻叫他站住，只说了短短几句十分尖刻的话，就让对方明白了，站在他面前的是一个中尉，而不是别的下级军官。这时
Once, when he met a reporter on the street who he thought was behaving vulgarly, he immediately told him to stop. He only said a few very sharp words to let the other person understand that the person standing in front of him was a lieutenant, not other junior officers. At this time,
正好有2位长得不错的女士打旁边路过，他就格外说得娓娓动听。皮罗戈夫向来热心于附庸风雅，一再鼓励过画家皮斯卡略夫。不过
there happened to be 2 good-looking ladies passing by, and he spoke particularly eloquently. Pirogov has always been enthusiastic about arty style and has repeatedly encouraged the painter Piskarev, however.
这或许是因为他很想看到一张画有他的勃勃英姿的肖像。关于皮罗戈夫的品格谈得够多了。一个极好的人是难以隶属其所有的美德的，越是细加详查。
This may be because he longed to see a portrait of himself in heroic proportions. Enough has been said about Pyrogov's character. It is difficult to enumerate all the virtues of an excellent person, the more carefully you look at them.
就越会发现其更多的新的特点，那么一一描述出来就会无尽无休了。伊法维布尔加林 1789至1859，俄国作家，反动刊物《北方蜜蜂》的创办人。
The more new features you will discover, then describing them one by one will be endless. Francois Bulgarin, 1789 to 1859, Russian writer, founder of the reactionary publication Northern Bee.
阿尔亚谢普希金 1799至1837，俄罗斯伟大的诗人、作家。三尼伊格列奇 1787至1867，与布尔加林一道创办《北方蜜蜂》，是当时红极一时的文人。
A.S. Pushkin, 1799 to 1837, a great Russian poet and writer. New York Gretsch, 1787 to 1867, who co-founded Northern Bee with Bulgarin, was a very popular literati at that time.
斯阿奥尔洛夫是当时低级趣味的庸俗小说的作者。武士剧作家福亚奥泽罗夫 1769至1816写的一出悲剧，是当时颇为流行的平庸之作。
A.A. Orlov was the author of vulgar novels with low taste at that time. It is a tragedy written by the playwright Vladimir Ozerov, 1769 to 1816. It was a popular and mediocre work at the time.
六是著名作家亚谢格里鲍耶陀夫 1795至1829所写的一部有名的喜剧，极其尖刻的讽刺和抨击了当时的社会政治制度。
Is a famous comedy written by the famous writer Shai Griboidov, 1795 to 1829, which extremely harshly satirized and criticized the social and political system of the time.
且说皮罗戈夫一直在陌生女郎后面穷追不舍，不时地向她问这问那，而她则生硬地有一句没一句地含含糊糊地应付他。他们走过了昏暗的喀山大教堂的大门，拐进了平民街。
Moreover, Pyrogov has been chasing after the strange girl, asking her this and that from time to time, while she responded to him stiffly, wordlessly, and vaguely. They walked through the dim gate of Kazan Cathedral and turned into Pingmin Street.
那是烟草店和小货摊林立，德国手艺匠和芬兰女人聚集的一条街。金发女郎一阵小跑，轻快地闪入一幢脏兮兮的房子的大门里。皮罗戈夫尾随而入，他沿着又黑又窄的楼梯跑上楼去。
It was a street lined with tobacco shops and stalls, where German craftsmen and Finnish women gathered. The blonde trotted and briskly entered the door of a dirty house. Pyrogov followed. She ran up the dark and narrow stairs.
进了一间房里，皮罗戈夫也大胆地挤了进去。他置身于一间大房间里，只见四壁黑乎乎的，天花板上挂满了烟子，桌上摆着一堆螺丝钉、钳工用具、闪亮的咖啡壶和烛台。
Entering a room, Pyrogov also squeezed in boldly. He was in a large room with dark walls and smoke hanging from the ceiling. On the table lies a pile of screws, bench tools, a shiny coffee pot and candlesticks.
地板上撒着铜屑和铁屑。皮罗戈夫立刻猜着了， 这是一个工匠的家。那陌生的女人又飘然进了一个侧门。他沉思了片刻，然而按照俄罗斯人的规矩，还是决定往前走去。
The floor was strewn with copper and iron filings. Pirogov immediately guessed that this was a craftsman's home. The strange woman walked into a side door again. He thought for a moment, but, following Russian rules, decided to move forward.
他进了那间房里，他一点也不像刚才看到的房间收拾得干干净净，说明这里的主人是一个德国人。他看着眼前这十分奇怪的景象，怔呆了。当面坐着席勒。
He entered that room. It was nothing like the room he had just seen. It was clean and tidy, indicating that the owner here was a German. He was stunned at the very strange sight before him. Sitting in front of him was Schiller.
不是那个写威廉·退尔和30年战争史的作家席勒一，而是平民街上有名的汉阳铁壶的工匠席勒。站在席勒身旁的是霍夫曼，也不是作家霍夫曼二。
It is not Schiller, the writer who wrote William Tell and History of the 30 Years' War, but Schiller, the famous craftsman who welded iron kettles in Pingman Street. Standing next to Schiller is Hoffman, nor the writer Hoffman.
而是从军官接来的一位好鞋匠，席勒的好友霍夫曼。席勒喝得醉醺醺的，坐在椅子上，顿着脚，激动地说着什么事儿。皮罗戈夫倒也不觉得有什么稀罕的。
It was a good shoemaker from Officerstrasse and Schiller's good friend Hoffman. Schiller was drunk, sitting on a chair, stamping his feet, and talking excitedly about something. Pirogov didn't think there was anything strange about it.
令他深以为意的是这两个人的稀奇古怪的姿势。席勒坐在那儿，伸着那只大鼻子，仰着脑袋，而霍夫曼则伸出2个指头，捏着那只鼻子，用修鞋刀的锋刃在鼻子上刮来刮去。
What struck him deeply was the strange posture of these two people. What struck him deeply was the strange posture of these two people. Schiller sat there with his big nose stretched out and his head tilted back, while Hoffman stretched out 2 fingers, pinched the nose, and scraped it with the blade of a shoe repair knife.
两个人都说着德语，所以只懂得一句古特伊莫根三的皮罗戈夫弄不明白是怎么回事。不过席勒的话大抵是这么个意思。席勒1759至1805。
Both men spoke German, so Pirogov, who only knew Gutmogen, could not understand what was going on. However, Schiller's words roughly mean this. Schiller, 1759 to 1805.
德国著名的诗人和剧作家阿尔霍夫曼1776至1822，德国著名的小说家、画家。三德语，早安。我不想要了，我不要鼻子。他挥动着胳膊说道。
Famous German poet and playwright. Hoffman, 1776 to 1822, a famous German novelist and painter. German, good morning. I don't want it anymore, I don't want a nose, he said, waving his arms.
我光是鼻子每个月就得用掉3俄镑一鼻烟，我得付钱给倒霉的俄国烟铺，因为德国烟铺不卖俄国鼻烟，我给倒霉的俄国烟铺每磅付40戈比，一个月就是1卢布20戈比。
My nose alone consumes 3 pounds of snuff every month. I have to pay the unlucky Russian tobacco shop, because the German tobacco shop does not sell Russian snus. I pay the unlucky Russian tobacco shop 40 kopecks per pound, that is 1 ruble and 20 kopecks a month.
12个月就是14卢布40戈比。你听明白吗，我的朋友霍夫曼？光鼻子就得花掉14卢布40戈比。逢年过节，我得闻拉比烟，因为我不想在逢年过节的时候去闻糟糕的俄国鼻烟。
12 months is 14 rubles and 40 kopecks. Do you understand, my friend Hoffman? A bare nose costs 14 rubles and 40 kopecks. On holidays I have to smell Rabbi, because I don't want to smell bad Russian snus on holidays.
一年闻2磅拉比烟，1磅2个卢布，6加14，光是烟钱就是20卢布40戈比2，这是敲诈。我问你，我的朋友霍夫曼，不是吗？我是士瓦本公国3的德国人。
2 pounds of Rabbi tobacco a year costs 2 rubles a pound. 6 plus 14, the cigarette money alone is 20 rubles and 40 kopecks. This is blackmail. Let me ask you, my friend Hoffman, isn't it? I am a German from the Principality of Swabia.
我有国王在德国，我不要鼻子，给我割掉。我的鼻子。1俄镑等于409.5克。二席勒喝醉了，前言不搭后语，把2磅拉比烟值4卢布说成6卢布。
I have a king in Germany. I don't want a nose. Cut it off. Here, my nose. 1 Russian pound is equal to 409.5 grams. Schiller was drunk, and his words did not match his words. He said that 2 pounds of Robbie cigarettes are worth 4 rubles. Said to be 6 rubles.
3中世纪日耳曼的一个公国，要不是皮罗戈夫中尉突然闯了进来，那么毫无疑问，霍夫曼不管3721就会把鼻子割掉了，因为他已经拿好了刀子，就像是要裁截血掌一样。
A German principality in the Middle Ages. If Lieutenant Pirogov hadn't suddenly barged in, there is no doubt that Hoffman would have cut off his nose regardless of what happened, because he had already taken the knife, just like cutting off the sole of a shoe.
席勒很不痛快，忽然有一个不请自来的陌生人闯了进来，不合时宜地碍了他的事。虽然他又喝啤酒又喝白酒，弄得醉态熏然。
Schiller was very unhappy. Suddenly an uninvited stranger broke in and interfered with his business at an inappropriate time. Although he drank beer and liquor and became drunk.
倒也懂得这样一副样子，且又当着外人的面干这种事情不大体面。趁这时候，皮罗戈夫微微俯身，以他那特有的亲切语调说道：“请你们原谅我，出去。”席勒拖长声调答道：“这样一来。”
I also know that it is not decent to look like this and do such a thing in front of outsiders. At this moment, Pirogov leaned slightly and said in his unique friendly tone, Please forgive me. Get out. Schiller replied in a drawl. In this way.
皮罗戈夫不知所措了，他还从来不曾遇到这样粗鲁的对待。脸上微露的一丝笑容倏然不见了，他深感自尊心受到了伤害，便说：“我真奇怪，先生，您大概没有看出来，我是一个军官。”
Pirogov was at a loss. He had never been treated so rudely. The slight smile on his face suddenly disappeared. He felt deeply that his self-esteem was hurt, so he said,"I'm so surprised, sir, you probably don't see, I'm an officer."
军官值几个钱？我是士瓦本公国的德国人。劳作。这时， 席勒用拳头猛击一下桌子，就会当上个军官，1年半是官升，2年中尉，明我马上就是个军官。不过，我不想到军队去混。
How much is an officer worth? I am a German from the Duchy of Swabia. At this time, Schiller slammed his fist on the table, will become an officer, 1.5 years as a cadet, 2 years as a lieutenant, and tomorrow I will be an officer immediately. However, I don't want to join the army.
我对于军官就是这个，呸！说是席勒伸出手掌，在他上面啐了一口。皮罗戈夫眼看别无他法，只好悻悻离去。不过，这样粗暴的对待有损于他的身份，委实令他很不痛快。
This is what I think of officers, bah. While speaking, Schiller stretched out his palm and spat on it. Seeing that Pirogov had no other choice, he had to leave in anger. However, such rough treatment was detrimental to his status and really made him very sad. Not happy.
他几次在楼梯上停下脚步，仿佛要鼓起勇气，想法子要让席勒明白他是过于放肆了。后来转念一想，席勒还是可以原谅的，因为他的脑袋被啤酒灌糊涂了。
He stopped several times on the stairs, as if trying to muster up his courage and think of some way to make Schiller understand that he was being too presumptuous. Later, on second thought, Schiller could be forgiven because his head was filled with beer.
何况他眼前又浮现出金发女郎的秀丽的姿容，于是他决定把这件事置之度外。第二天一大早，皮罗戈夫又来到杨铁匠的铺子里，在前面的房间里，他遇见了姿容秀丽的金发女郎。
What's more, the beautiful appearance of the blonde appeared in front of his eyes, so he decided to ignore the matter. Early the next morning, Pirogov came to the foreign blacksmith's shop again. In the front room he met the pretty blonde.
他一脸严肃的表情，语气冷冰冰地问道：“您有事吗？”“哦，您好，我亲爱的，您不认得我了吧？您装的倒挺像，多么漂亮的眼睛！”皮罗戈夫中尉边说着，就想用手指亲热地撩撩他的下巴颏。可是
With a serious expression on her face, she asked in a cold tone, Are you okay? Oh, hello, my dear. You don't recognize me, do you? You look quite like me, what beautiful eyes. Lieutenant Pirogov said, trying to fondly tease her chin with his fingers. But
金发女郎不由得发出一声惊叫，又冷冰冰地问了一句：“您有事吗？”“就想看看您，没有别的事。”皮罗戈夫中尉说道，一边亲切地微笑着，一边挨上前去。不过看到那金发女郎，吓得要往门里钻。
The blonde couldn't help but let out a scream, and asked coldly, Are you okay? I just want to see you, nothing else, Lieutenant Pirogov said, smiling kindly as he stepped forward. However, when he saw the blonde, he was so frightened that he tried to crawl in the door.
又补上一句：“亲爱的，我要定做一副马刺，您能给我做马刺吗？就算是为了爱您吧，我其实根本就不需要马刺，倒是要一副马龙头。多么好看的小手！”
Added another sentence, My dear, I want to make a pair of spurs. Can you make them for me? Even if it's just to love you, I don't actually need spurs at all, but a bridle. What a pretty little hand.
皮罗戈夫中尉在做类似的表白的时候，总是显得异常的亲昵。我去叫我的丈夫来，德国女人大声说道，转身走了。过了几分钟， 皮罗戈夫看见席勒走出房来，一副睡眼惺忪。
Lieutenant Pyrogov always seemed extremely affectionate when making similar confessions. I'm going to call my husband, the German woman said loudly, turned and left. After a few minutes, Pyrogov saw Schiller coming out of the room, looking sleepy.
刚从昨晚的醉态中醒来的样子，他瞥了一眼那军官，模模糊糊地想起了昨天白天发生的事情。他一点也不记得昨天自己那副失态的样子了，不过还是意识到做了一件傻事。
Just woke up from last night's drunken state. He glanced at the officer and vaguely recalled what had happened during the day yesterday. He didn't remember his gaffe yesterday at all, but he still realized that he had done something stupid.
所以摆出一副十分冷漠的神气来接待那个军官。不给15卢布，我不做马刺。他说想把皮罗戈夫支走，因为他是一个诚实的德国人。
So he received the officer with a very cold air. I won't do Spurs without 15 rubles, he said, wanting to send Pyrogov away because he was an honest German.
面对一个曾经看见他有失体面的狼狈相的人，到底是难为情的。席勒喜欢邀上两三友人一起喝酒，不让外人看见，每逢这种时候总是锁上门，连工友也拒之门外。为什么这么贵呢？
It was embarrassing to face someone who had seen him in a disgraceful state. Schiller liked to invite 2 or 3 friends to drink together without letting outsiders see him. At such times, he always locked the door, even his co-workers were kept away. Why is it so expensive?
皮罗戈夫温和地问道。德国人的手艺嘛，席勒摸着下巴颏，冷漠地答道。俄国人只要2个卢布就肯做。好吧，就算是我喜欢您，愿意跟您交个朋友吧，我付15个卢布。席勒沉吟了片刻。
Pyrogov asked gently, It's German craftsmanship. Schiller touched his chin and replied indifferently. The Russians are willing to do it for just 2 rubles. Okay, even if I like you and want to be your friend, I'll pay you 15 rubles. Schiller pondered for a moment.
他是一个诚实的德国人，难免有些不好意思。他还是想让皮罗戈夫自己打消这个定做的念头，就声明说最少要2个星期才能做好。没料到皮罗戈夫二话没说，便全都同意了。
He was an honest German and was inevitably a little embarrassed. He still wanted Pyrogov to give up the idea of customizing it, so he stated that it would take at least 2 weeks to complete it. Unexpectedly, Pyrogov agreed without saying a word.
席勒动起了心思，寻思着怎么把这件活做得像样些，货真价实能值15卢布。这时，金发女郎走了进来，在摆满了咖啡壶的桌上翻找东西。中尉趁着席勒在沉思的时候，走到他跟前。
Schiller started to think about how to do this job in a decent way, so that the real thing could be worth 15 rubles. At this moment, the blonde came in and rummaged around on the table covered with coffee pots. The lieutenant took advantage of Schiller's deep thought and walked up to her.
捏了捏他那裸露到肩头的胳膊，这使席勒很不高兴，梅因弗劳，依他嚷了起来。瓦斯弗伦奇多赫，二金发女郎答应着，跟其3到厨房去。1德语，我的老婆；2德语。
He pinched her arm that was exposed to her shoulders. This made Schiller very unhappy. Meine Frau, he cried. Was violoncello? The blonde agreed. Then she go to the kitchen. German, my wife. German.
什么事？三德语，快走！金发女郎转身出去了。那么，事过2个星期罗？皮罗戈夫又问道。是的，过2个星期。席勒一边沉思着，一边答道：“我眼下有许多活计要做。再见，我以后再来。再见。”
What's up? German, walk quickly. The blonde turned and walked out. So, 2 weeks later? Pirogov asked again. Yes, in 2 weeks, Schiller replied thoughtfully. I have a lot of work to do at the moment. Goodbye. I'll come back later. Goodbye.
席勒答道，随即把门关了。皮罗戈夫下定决心要穷追不舍。虽然德国女人分明是不理睬他，他闹不明白，怎么能服逆他的好意呢？特别是凭着他那殷勤的态度和闪光的官衔。
Schiller replied, closing the door. Pirogov was determined to pursue her. Although the German woman clearly ignored him, he couldn't understand how she could go against his good intentions, especially with his diligent attitude and shining official rank.
完全有权得到青睐。不过，也应当说明，席勒的妻子虽然容貌姣好，却心眼愚蠢。然而，愚蠢在漂亮妇人身上却有着特殊的魅力。至少我知道，许多做丈夫的因为妻子愚蠢而兴高采烈。
Fully entitled to favor. However, it should also be noted that although Schiller's wife was beautiful, she was stupid in mind. But folly has a special charm in beautiful women. At least I know many husbands who are elated because their wives are stupid.
把愚蠢看作是天真无邪的表现，人的美貌会产生特别的奇迹。美人身上一切心灵上的缺陷不仅不会令人厌恶，反而特别惹人怜爱。在他们身上，恶习本身也使人觉得可爱。不过，
Think of stupidity as a sign of innocence. Human beauty works special wonders. All the defects of mind in beautiful women, far from being repulsive, are particularly endearing. In them, vices themselves are endearing, but
一旦红颜消退，那么女人就得比男人聪明10倍，才能引人注目。即使不能赢得爱慕，至少可以得到敬重。话又说回来，席勒的妻子尽管愚蠢，却一直安守妇道。
once the beauty fades, then a woman has to be 10 times smarter than a man in order to attract attention, if not to win love, at least to gain respect. Then again, Schiller's wife, despite her stupidity, had always been a woman.
所以皮罗戈夫那大胆的计谋要想得逞，并非易事。不过呢，去克服重重的障碍，总给人带来一种满足感。于是金发女郎便一天天变得让他牵肠挂肚了。他常常去打听马刺做好没有。
Therefore, it was not easy for Pirogov's bold plan to succeed. However, overcoming obstacles always brought a sense of satisfaction, so the blonde became more and more worried about him day by day. He often asked if the Spurs were doing well.
惹得席勒都厌烦了。席勒全力以赴，尽快把马刺的活干完。马刺终于做好了。哎呀，好精巧的手艺！皮罗戈夫中尉一见马刺便嚷开了：“天啊，做得真巧！”
It made Schiller tired. Schiller went all out to get the Spurs job done as quickly as possible. The Spurs finally got it done. Oh, what a delicate craftsmanship! Lieutenant Pirogov shouted as soon as he saw the Spurs. Oh my gosh, what a clever job!
就是我们的将军也没有这样好的马刺。一种洋洋自得的心情在席勒的内心里荡漾开来，他那双眼睛显得十分高兴，于是他不再对皮罗戈夫心存芥蒂了。这个俄国军官是个聪明人。
Even our generals don't have such good spurs. A feeling of self-satisfaction rippled in Schiller's heart. His eyes looked very happy, so he no longer had any grudge against Pirogov. This Russian officer is a smart man.
他暗自忖道：那么您还可以做个套子吗？譬如说，做一个剑鞘，或者给别的东西配上个套子什么的。嗨，那不难，席勒微笑着说。那就给我做个剑鞘吧。我给您把剑拿来。
He thought to himself. So, can you also make a case? For example, make a scabbard or put a case on something else. Well, that's not difficult, Schiller said with a smile. Then make me a scabbard. I will bring you a sword.
我有一把挺好的土耳其短剑，可是我想另外配上一个剑鞘。席勒就像是挨了炸弹轰顶似的，他忽然皱眉蹙额起来。真糟糕，他暗自想到，心里责骂自己不该去揽这个活计。
I have a nice Turkish dagger, but I want a scabbard for it. Schiller seemed to have been hit by a bomb. He suddenly frowned. It's terrible. He thought to himself, mentally scolding himself for taking this job.
他觉得说了又不干是不体面的，再说俄国军官还夸奖过他的手艺呢。他只好微微地晃了晃脑袋，答应下来了。然而皮罗戈夫出门时又厚颜无耻地吻了一下漂亮的金发女郎的樱唇。
He felt that it would be dishonorable to refuse to do it after he said it. Besides, the Russian officer had praised his skills. He had no choice but to shake his head slightly and agree. However, when Pirogov went out, he shamelessly kissed the beautiful blonde's lips.
又是席勒疑虑重重。我认为向读者简要地介绍一下，席勒不会是多余的。席勒是一个地地道道、不折不扣的德国人。打从20岁起，也就是从俄国人还马马虎虎过日子的那段时光起。
It also made Schiller doubtful. I think it will not be superfluous to give the reader a brief introduction to Schiller, who was a thoroughly German. Since the age of 20, that is, from the time when Russians were still living SOSO life.
他就把自己的整个生活安排得井井有条，而且无论在任何情况下都不破例。他规定7点起床，下午2点吃午饭，一切都准时去做，每到礼拜天就醉他一回。
He arranged his whole life in an orderly manner and made no exceptions under any circumstances. He stipulates to get up at 7 o'clock, have lunch at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, do everything on time, and get drunk every Sunday.
他决心用10年时间积攒下5万卢布的资本，这就要像命中注定那样信守不渝和不可更改，因为与其去劝说德国人更改誓言。
He was determined to spend 10 years accumulating 50,000 rubles in capital, which he had to abide by unswervingly and unchangeably as he was destined to do, because instead of trying to persuade the Germans to change their oath,
还不如去劝说官员别去探头探脑看上司的门房来的便当。他无论如何也不增加自己的开支，即使是马铃薯的价钱比平日又涨了许多，他也不多添一个戈比，情愿少买一些。
It's better to persuade officials not to poke their heads in to see the boss's concierge. He did not increase his expenses under any circumstances. Even if the price of potatoes increased much more than usual, he would not add a kopeck more and would rather buy less.
虽然有时免不了饿肚子，但他还是能够挨得过去的。他做事可说是精细入微，规定一昼夜亲吻妻子不得超过2次。为了避免多吻1次，他一直只在汤里放1勺胡椒。不过在礼拜天，
Although he was inevitably hungry sometimes, he could still endure it. He was meticulous in his work and stipulated that he should not kiss his wife more than twice a day and night. In order to avoid kissing her more than once, he always only put a spoonful of pepper in the soup. However, on Sunday,
这个规矩就不那么严格遵行了，因为席勒到时候要喝2瓶啤酒和1瓶喝蓝琴劲酒，而后者一向是被他骂不绝口的。他喝起酒来，一点也不像英国人那样，一吃完饭便锁上门，自斟自酌。
This rule was not strictly adhered to, because Schiller had to drink 2 bottles of beer and 1 bottle of parsley, the latter of which he always scolded. He drank wine, not at all like an Englishman. As soon as he finished his meal, he locked the door and drank to himself.
恰恰相反，他这个德国人喝酒总是快活随意，不是跟鞋匠霍夫曼，就是同木匠孔茨，也是德国人，一个大酒鬼，一块痛饮。这就是落落大方的席勒的性格，因而最终弄得手头十分拮据。
On the contrary, he, a German, always drank happily and casually, either with Hoffmann, the shoemaker, or with Kunz, the carpenter, who was also a German and a big drinker. This was the character of Schiller, who was generous and generous, so he eventually became very strapped for money.
虽然他是一个反应迟钝的人，又是一个德国人，可是皮罗戈夫的举动还是在他的心里激起了妒意。他绞尽了脑汁，还是想不出办法来躲开这个俄国军官。而这时，
Although he was a slow man and a German, Pyrogov's behavior aroused jealousy in his heart. He racked his brains, but still couldn't think of a way to avoid the Russian officer. And this time,
皮罗戈夫正待在同伴们中间抽着烟斗，因为上天的有意安排，但凡是军官都是抽着烟斗，话中有话，满面含笑地暗示他跟漂亮的德国女人有了隐秘的私情。用他的话来说，
Pyrogov was smoking a pipe among his companions. Because God had arranged that all officers smoked pipes, there was something in his words and a smile on his face, hinting that he had a secret with a beautiful German woman. Personal affair. In his words,
他跟这个妞已是情爱甚笃。其实呢，他对于赢得她的芳心几乎不抱什么希望了。有一天，他沿着平民街无事闲逛，不时地望望席勒那挂着画有咖啡壶和茶炊的醒目招牌的房子。
he and this girl were already deeply in love, but in fact, he had almost no hope of winning her heart. One day, he was strolling along the Rue Pleine, looking from time to time at Schiller's house with its eye-catching signboard showing a coffee pot and a samovar.
真是喜出望外，他一眼看见金发女郎正探头窗外注视着过往的行人。他驻足而立，朝他挥挥手说：“古特·莫根。”金发女郎犹如见了熟人似的，朝他点了点头。“喂，您丈夫在家吗？”“在家。”
He was really overjoyed. He saw the blonde leaning out the window and watching the passers-by. He stopped, waved to her and said, "Gut Morgen." The blonde nodded to him as if she had met an acquaintance. "Hello, is your husband at home?" "At home."
金发女郎答道：“他什么时候不在家呢？” 每个礼拜天不在家，金发女郎傻乎乎地说道。这样倒好，皮罗戈夫暗地思量着，这个机会难得。于是下一个星期天
The blonde replied. When was he not at home? Not at home every Sunday, the blonde said stupidly. That's good, Pyrogov thought secretly, this is a rare opportunity. So, next Sunday.
他冷不防地出现在金发女郎的面前。席勒果然不在家，漂亮的主妇吓坏了。不过皮罗戈夫这一回可是谨慎多了，态度非常的恭敬，深鞠一躬。
He suddenly appeared in front of the blonde. Schiller was indeed not at home. The beautiful housewife was frightened. However, Pyrogov was more cautious this time, and bowed deeply with great respect.
显示出他那灵活而竖着腰带的身躯的迷人风采。他十分亲切而有礼貌地说说笑笑，而傻乎乎的德国女人只简单的随口应答着。最后，他什么法都用遍了，还是斗不起他的兴致。
Showing the charming grace of his flexible and girdle body. He talked and laughed very kindly and politely, while the silly German woman simply responded casually. In the end, he tried every trick, but he still couldn't interest her.
便向他提议跳跳舞，德国女人立刻便同意了，因为但凡德国的女人都爱好跳舞。皮罗戈夫这一下可满怀希望了。其一，这样一来可以给他带来乐趣；其二，这可以显示他的敏捷和灵巧。
He proposed to her to dance. The German woman agreed immediately. Because all German women love to dance. Pyrogov was full of hope now. Firstly, it would bring her pleasure. Secondly, it would show his agility and dexterity.
其三，跳舞可以挨得很近，搂抱着漂亮的德国女人的腰肢，以便得寸进尺。简而言之，他料定这么一来就可以马到成功。他开始跳一种加沃特舞衣，因为他知道对付德国女人要一步步来。
Thirdly, when dancing, he could get very close to her and hug the beautiful German woman's waist in order to gain an advantage. In short, he was sure that this would be an immediate success. He began to dance a kind of gavotte, because he knew that dealing with a German woman was a step-by-step process.
漂亮的德国女人走到了房间中央，抬起了一只迷人的仙足。这个姿势惹得皮罗戈夫欣喜若狂，便情不自禁地前去吻她。德国女人一叠连声地喊叫着，这在皮罗戈夫看来。
The beautiful German woman walked to the center of the room and raised a charming slender foot. This gesture made Pyrogov ecstatic, and he couldn't help but go to kiss her. The German woman kept shouting, which seemed to Pyrogov.
就更添了迷人的风情，他连连狂吻着她。忽然间，门陡地开了，席勒带着霍夫曼和木匠孔茨走了进来。三个体面的手艺匠人一个个喝得酩酊大醉。
It added to the charming charm. He kissed her wildly again and again. Suddenly, the door opened sharply, and Schiller walked in with Hoffmann and the carpenter Kuntz. The three respectable craftsmen were all very drunk.
以法国的一种漫步舞。不过，我还是留给读者去推想一下，席勒会是多么的愤慨和恼怒啊！无耻！他怒气冲冲地嚷道：“你怎么胆敢亲我的老婆？你是个下流胚，而不是俄国军官。”
A French slow dance. However, I leave it to the reader to imagine how indignant and annoyed Schiller would have been. Shameless, he shouted angrily, how dare you kiss my wife? You are a scumbag, not a Russian officer.
你真该死！我的朋友霍夫曼，我是德国人，而不是俄国猪猡。霍夫曼点头称是。啊，我不要戴绿帽子！我的朋友霍夫曼抓住他的领子轰出去，我不想看见他。他使劲挥动着胳膊，继续说着
Damn you. My friend Hoffman, I am a German, not a Russian pig. Hoffman nodded in agreement. Ah, I don't want to be a cuckold. My friend Hoffman, grab him by the collar and throw him out. I don't want to see him, he continued, waving his arms vigorously.
脸孔涨得像他那件红呢子坎肩一样的颜色。我在彼得堡住了8年，我的母亲在施瓦本，我的舅舅在纽伦堡。我是德国人，不是牛肉。叫他滚蛋！我的朋友霍夫曼拽住他的手脚。
His face turned as red as his red woolen waistcoat. I have lived in Petersburg for 8 years. My mother is in Swabia. My uncle is in Nuremberg. I am a German, not a beef. Tell him to get out, my friend Hoffman. Grab him by the hands and feet.
我的伙伴孔茨。接着，3个德国人一把抓住皮罗戈夫的手和脚。他突然挣扎了一阵子。这3个手艺匠人是住在彼得堡的德国人中间最有气力的人。这一回对他可是十分粗暴。
My buddy Kuntz. Then 3 Germans grabbed Pyrogov's hands and feet. He struggled in vain for a while. These 3 craftsmen were the strongest among the Germans living in Petersburg. This I was very rude to him once.
不讲任何客气，老实说，我找不到合适的字眼来描述这令人可悲的遭遇。我深信，席勒第2天准是在心惊胆战中度过的，一定会浑身索索发抖，等待着警察随时上门来。
Without being polite, I honestly can't find the right words to describe this deplorable experience. I am convinced that Schiller must have spent the next day in fear, trembling all over, waiting for the police to come at any time.
只要昨天发生的事情能像一场梦似的烟消云散，他宁愿破财消灾。可是已经发生的事是无可挽回了。皮罗戈夫愤慨和狂怒之状是无法加以描述的。只要一想到那难堪的羞辱，
As long as what happened yesterday can disappear like a dream, he would rather spend money to eliminate disaster. However, what has happened is irreversible. Pyrogov's indignation and rage are beyond description. Just think of that embarrassing humiliation.
他就愤怒欲狂。他认为让席勒受一顿吃刑和放逐到西伯利亚去，那还是最轻的惩罚。他快步赶回家去，以便穿戴整齐，直接去禀报将军。
He became mad with rage. He considered Schiller to be whipped and banished to Siberia as the lightest punishment. He hurried home so that he could dress neatly and go directly to report to the general.
把几个德国手艺匠人的无法无天的暴行着力地渲染一番。他想马上递一纸呈文到参谋总部去。要是参谋总部承办不力，那就直接上诉到内府衙门，再不然就上达天听。然而
The lawless atrocities of a few German craftsmen are highlighted. He wanted to submit a submission to the staff headquarters immediately. If the General Staff Headquarters fails to punish the case effectively, it will appeal directly to the Inner Government Office, or else it will be appealed to Datian. However,
这件公案却有点古怪的不了了之。他顺路拐进了一家糖果点心店，吃了2个分层夹馅的小点心。 看了看北方蜜蜂上登载的消息，走出来时已经不那么怒气冲冲了。再说天已入暮。
This case was a bit strange and went unsolved. He turned into a candy store, ate 2 layered snacks, read the news published in the Northern Bee, and when he walked out, he was already tired. So angry. Besides, it's already dusk.
凉爽宜人，他正好在涅瓦大街上散散心。快到9点钟时，他已心平气顺了，觉得星期天去打扰将军不大合适，更何况将军肯定是被人请到什么地方做客去了，所以
It was cool and pleasant, and he happened to take a walk on the Nevsky Prospect. By 9 o'clock, he had calmed down and felt that it would not be appropriate to disturb the general on Sunday, not to mention that the general must be invited to be a guest somewhere. So,
他便动身去一位检察官的家里参加晚会，有一批文武官员在那里欢聚一堂。他在那里愉快地度过了一个晚上，跳马祖尔卡舞一出尽了风头，不仅让女舞伴们如醉如痴。
He then set off to attend a party at the home of a prosecutor, where a group of civil and military officials were gathering. He spent the evening there happily, and stole the show by dancing the mazurka, which not only enthralled his female partners,
而且也令男舞伴们啧啧称道。伊波兰的一种民族舞蹈在当时颇为流行。我们这个世界真是无奇不有。前天我走在涅瓦大街上，想起了这两桩轶事，心里暗忖着。
And it also made the male dance partners admire it. A Polish folk dance that was quite popular at the time. Our world is really full of wonders. And it also made the male dance partners admire it. A Polish folk dance that was quite popular at the time. Our world is really full of wonders. The day before yesterday, I was walking on Nevsky Prospect, thinking of these 2 anecdotes, and thinking to myself,
命运是多么奇怪和莫名其妙地捉弄我们啊！我们什么时候得到过所期望的东西？我们又何曾达到过我们似乎力所能及的目标？一切都事与愿违。命运赐给一个人十分出色的骏马。
How strangely and inexplicably fate plays tricks upon us. When have we ever gotten what we expected? How have we ever achieved goals that seemed within our reach? Everything backfired. Destiny bestows upon a man a very fine horse.
而他却冷漠无情地让他们驾着车四处闲游，一点也不知怜惜他们的健美出众。而另一个人爱马成癖，却只能徒步而行。当别人牵着千里驹在他身旁走过时，只有啧啧称奇的份儿。
But he let them drive around in a car indifferently, without any pity for their outstanding fitness, while another man loved horses, but could only walk on foot. When I walked by, I could only marvel.
有的人家里有上等厨师，可惜只有一张小嘴，2小块肉就吞咽不下；而另一个人嘴巴有参谋总部医的拱门那么大，可惜只有吃一份土豆做成的德国餐的命。
Some people have a good chef at home, but it's a pity that they only have a small mouth, and they can't swallow 2 small pieces of meat, while another person's mouth is as big as the arch of the General Staff headquarters, but it's a pity that he can only eat a German meal made of potatoes. Meal life.
命运是多么奇怪地捉弄我们啊！然而，最为奇怪的是涅瓦大街上发生的事情。可别相信这条涅瓦大街。当我走过这条大街时，我总是把披风裹得严严实实的。
How strangely fate plays tricks on us. However, the strangest thing is what happened on Nevsky Prospect. Oh, don't believe this Nevsky Prospect. When I walk through the street, I always wrap my cloak tightly.
根本不去注意那些迎面碰见的事物，一切全是骗局，一切全是梦幻，一切都是表里不一。你觉得那位身穿精致的礼服正在漫步的先生很富有吧？根本没那回事。
Pay no attention to the things that come your way. Everything is a scam, everything is a dream, everything is duplicitous. Do you think the gentleman strolling in the exquisite dress is rich? That's not the case at all.
他全部的家当就是那件礼服。你以为驻足在兴建中的教堂之前的那两个胖子是在谈论建筑艺术吧？也没有那回事。他们闲聊的是两只乌鸦面对面的蹲着，实在令人奇怪。
All he owned was the dress. Do you think the two fat men who stopped in front of the church under construction were talking about the art of architecture? Nothing like that. What they were chatting about was two crows crouching face to face.
你认为那个挥动着胳膊、热情洋溢的人是在说他的妻子从窗口把一支圆珠笔扔到了一个素不相识的军官身上吧？完全不是，他是在谈论拉斐德二呢。你以为那些淑女们，但是。
Do you think the enthusiastic guy waving his arms was talking about his wife throwing a ballpoint pen out of the window at an unknown officer? Not at all, he was talking about Lafayette. Do you think the enthusiastic guy waving his arms was talking about his wife throwing a ballpoint pen out of the window at an unknown officer? Not at all, he was talking about Lafayette. You thought those ladies, but...
淑女们是最不可信赖的，最好是少去张望商店的橱窗，那里摆出来的小事物非常精美，可是要价让你退避三舍。千万可别去窥视呢帽底下的淑女们的俏脸。
Ladies are the least trustworthy. It's better to avoid looking in store windows. The trinkets on display there are very beautiful, but the price will put you off. Don't peek at the pretty faces of the ladies under their woolen hats.
无论美人的斗篷在远处怎么飘然飞舞，我都绝不会跟上去寻幽探胜。离远点儿，看在上帝的份上，离街灯远点儿。快点儿，尽量快点儿，从旁边走过去。
No matter how the beauty's cloak flutters in the distance, I will never follow her to explore the secrets. Stay away, for God's sake, stay away from the street lights. Hurry, try to be as quick as possible, and walk past.
如果街灯只是在你那考究入时的礼服上泼上点发臭的灯油，那还算是你的福分。然而，除了街灯，其余的一切东西都会迷惑人。这条涅瓦大街时时刻刻在装假骗人。
It would be a blessing if the streetlights merely splashed a little stinky lamp oil on your fashionable dress. However, everything except streetlights can be confusing. This Nevsky Prospect is always pretending to be deceptive.
当浓浓的夜色笼罩下来，把千家万户的白色和浅黄色的墙壁衬托得格外分明的时候，当全城一片轰鸣和灯火辉煌，无数的教士马车从各处桥上奔涌而来，前导御手连声吆喝。
When the thick night falls, making the white and light yellow walls of thousands of houses stand out particularly clearly, when the whole city roars and lights shine, countless carriages rush from various bridges, leading the driver shouted repeatedly.
在马背上频频跃动的时候，当恶魔亲自点燃灯火，以便给万事万物罩上一层假面的时候，则尤其如此。1835年。 一指彼得堡东宫对面的一座大建筑物。
This is especially true when the horse is jumping frequently, when the devil himself lights the lamp in order to put a mask on everything. 1835. Refers to a large building opposite the Winter Palace in Petersburg.
阿尔拉斐德